Once Upon a New Year's Eve. By Melinda Curtis. Chapter 1. Christmas was over. Not that it had come and gone with much fanfare at Amelia Lawson's house. Her mother would most likely have had a heart attack to learn she'd made tuna casserole instead of turkey, and pancakes instead of pumpkin pie. Cards? Not a one. And gifts? She'd sent out electronic gift cards rather than wrapped presents. Amelia's one concession to the holiday was a 2-foot-tall live Christmas tree she'd bought at the grocery store. It had come with a shiny red and green garland. Having grown up in a household that kept Christmas decorations up year-round, she'd felt guilty that it lacked a star. But not guilty enough to do anything about it. Ho ho ho. Amelia steeped her tea in her quiet cabin at the base of the quiet mountains on the quiet edge of Christmastown, Maine. It was the day after Christmas and she had plenty of time before she had to be at work at her veterinarian clinic, which was practically in her backyard. Ho ho ho. That sounded like Santa? Amelia dropped her tea bag in her mug. Had her mother and sister finally come to visit? Doubtful. They were probably prowling the day after Christmas sales for more holiday bling. Besides, they hadn't talked to her in more than 3 years. Ho ho ho. Was it a parade? Doubtful. Christmastown was known for its holiday celebrations, but who staged a parade on a 2-lane highway that passed by a veterinary office and ended at a ski resort? But out on her deck there arose such a clatter, she had to look up to see what was the matter. Shades of Christmas poems. Amelia grimaced. If polar bears lived in Maine and slid wildly across icy decks in real-time slow-mo, she might have been worried. Being a vet and knowing polar bears weren't indigenous to Maine, she recognized the beast that lost its footing and slammed into her French doors for what it was, a large white Saint Bernard. The dog righted itself and pressed its black, baseball-sized nose to a pane of glass next to the door handle. An icicle of drool hung from its muzzle. Ho ho ho, he barked and then gave her a panting grin. Grabbing a dish towel, Amelia hurried across her small living room to her front door. Are you okay, big guy? The dog blew into the house along with a blast of frigid air. Both hit her square in the chest. It was the dog who knocked her to the hardwood. Thank you, thank you, thank you, he seemed to be saying as his spatula-sized tongue licked her face cleaner than a wet wipe on rib-stained fingers. And then he used her as a springboard to bound toward the fireplace. Shivering, her exuberant guest sat on the hearth where the remnants of last night's fire were just dying down. Drool-drenched, she was slower getting up. You caught me by surprise. Slower closing the door. Let's make a deal. Slow in her t-shirt and blue jeans to feel warm again. I dry you off and you won't tackle me. He gave a full-body, ear-flapping shake that didn't dislodge the drool cycle. I'll take that for a yes. He allowed Amelia to gently wipe at his mouth, removing fringes of ice and the icicle made of slobber. She cleaned the frost off his face next and then brushed the snow off his back. His body was pure white, rare for a Saint Bernard, and his fur thick enough she could fist her hands in it. His head was more true to the breed with a brown and black mask. While she rubbed him down, he wiggled his torso against her legs and occasionally wiped his drool on her jeans. Cocoa cold, he grumbled. You're a talker. Some dogs were, vocalizing every emotion rather than choosing to express themselves with their eyes. Amelia's father had been a vet and her hero. She'd been talking to animals since she'd uttered her first word, dog. Let's get you a blanket. She tossed her dish towel over her shoulder and then took the pink fuzzy throw with cats printed on it from the back of her brown couch. The dog eyed it warily and grumbled something that sounded like, cats? Cold dogs can't be choosy dogs. Again, he allowed Amelia to rub him down. When she was done, she folded the blanket, damp side together, and laid it on the floor near the fire. She'd noted he wore a blue collar and tag during her pat-down. The tag proclaimed him to be Snowflake. She didn't recognize the area code of the phone number beneath his name. Snowflake. What a fitting name. I bet someone's looking for you. She met his warm, friendly gaze and was struck with the thought that if lost, few people would try to find Amelia. She stared at her pathetic little tree. If only adding a star would illuminate what was missing in her life. Nothing like an animal to make you realize there's an empty space inside you. This was the day for deck clattering, but this time the sound was more the boom 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 of Santa's boots on a rooftop than snowflakes willy-nilly slide into home plate. A man appeared at her door. Tall, dark knit cap pulled low, yellow reflective sunglasses, a nose that looked as if it might have been broken, broad shoulders beneath a worn blue coat. He looked like one of the men from the ski patrol at the resort up the road. Athletic, authoritative. He removed his sunglasses. Angry. In her nice warm cabin behind her unlocked French doors, Amelia trembled like a startled chihuahua. If she didn't move, maybe he wouldn't see her. If she didn't move, maybe he'd go away. Unless, of course, the dog gave her away. The dog gave her away. Snowflake barked and ran to the door, looking over his shoulder when she didn't immediately follow, a string of drool where the icicle used to be. Okay. She forced her stocking feet to the door. But only because you're vouching for him. She opened the door and backed away, ready to sound a blustery warning like a startled chihuahua if letting him in turned out to be a bad idea. Snowflake pranced outside and herded the man in with a grumbly growl that sounded like, "About time." Unbelievable. The man's voice rang to the rafters. He was big and loud and unapologetic. I must have run a mile. Downhill. In snow boots. That is not how I pictured my morning. Unconcerned with the man's outburst, Snowflake trotted happily to the fireplace, where he dragged his paws across the cat blanket to rearrange it to his satisfaction, circled and then dropped on top of it. That dog has the right idea. The man tugged off his boots and set them next to the door. When did my job become so cold and thankless? It was the kind of question that required no answer. For a moment there was quiet. Only this quiet wasn't the serene quiet Amelia was used to. It was the unsettling quiet of the unknown. There was a shoeless stranger in her house. She folded and refolded the dish towel. She wanted him out. But he was, and she was. At some point in every quaking chihuahua's life, they had to step up and act like a Rottweiler. Amelia stepped forward and said, Her bootless guest ignored her and padded over to the fireplace in his thick wool socks. He unzipped his jacket, stuffed his gloves in his pockets and slipped the jacket off, draping it over her fire pokers. His hair was dark, crisply cut, but beanie mussed. Oh. Yeah. That's more like it. His anger was deflating like an inflatable snow globe at daylight. But nothing about his presence deflated. He had sturdy shoulders and steady brown eyes. He had the rigid posture and wide stance of a commander-in-chief. You couldn't knock him down and expect him not to get back up. Didn't catch your name. Not a question. An order. Ah, Amelia. The man was so at home in her home, she felt off balance, like the time she'd tried ice skating and discovered her ankles wouldn't hold. Amelia Lawson. Ah, the vet. He dug in his back pocket for his wallet, removed a card and held it out to her. Gavin Elliott. Boxes and bows, interior design and decoration and light displays. I was going to offer to take down your Christmas decorations in exchange for a cup of hot coffee or something, but, he glanced around. Ah. You're that Dr. Lawson. He recognized her name. Amelia snapped his card on the kitchen counter like a Rottweiler snaps at an unwelcome intruder. His glance landing on her. It was a pitying glance, one that found the weak spot in her armor and pressed on a patient's severing nerve. He cleared his throat. You're the one they call Dr. Scrooge, she finished briskly in her mother's scolding voice. She'd earned the moniker when she'd moved to Christmas Town 3 years ago. She was one of the few businesses in the area that didn't decorate for the holiday and their well-meaning Santa shaming had boomeranged. It wasn't entirely the town's fault. How were they to know her faith in peace on earth and goodwill to man had been shattered by her own Mama Claus? If you ever want to change your image, Gavin was saying. Boxes and bows helps the busy and holiday overwhelmed bring the magic of Christmas to life. There is no magic in Christmas. It was all store-bought. She rescued the tea bag and handed him her mug. Here. Hot tea. Never let it be said that Dr. Scrooge wasn't full of Christmas Town hospitality. Snowflake groaned and put his big head on his front paws, watching them the way a spectator watched a tennis match. Gavin drank her tea, studying Amelia over the top of the mug. Wondering, no doubt. Everyone wondered why she rejected the outward displays of Christmas. She'd only told one person. Her vet tech Francis. Who'd be expecting her at the clinic any minute. Amelia sighed and gestured to Snowflake. Is he yours? Snowflake grumbled deep and low in his throat and closed his eyes. The dog? No. Gavin gave her a softly crooked smile, which did softly crooked things to her insides. Interruption and annoyance aside, he was attractive. Too bad he knew it. If he's not your dog, why are you here? She blurted. He pretended not to hear her question. Won't take me long to box up your holiday decorations. My tree garland? She leaned on the kitchen counter, crumbling the dish towel in her hand. I think I can handle it. Then my job here is done. He nudged Snowflake's torso with his toe. Let's move, Snowball. Snowflake opened one eye and growled. Amelia's protective instincts surged to life, along with her backbone. She wasn't letting this man take that dog anywhere. His name is Snowflake. I thought he wasn't yours. He's not. I'm dog sitting for my friend Darren. He's a Navy SEAL doing training exercises at the Coast Guard base in Cape Cod the next couple of weeks. He brought me Snow Bucket yesterday as a Christmas present. Gavin leaned down and beat Snowflake's chest like a drum. You'd think a dog with his thick coat would be able to weather this cold. He's been in San Diego too long. He's a total weather wimp. Did she believe Gavin's story? Snowflake was thumping his tail and emitting that breathy, growly grumble that was his happy voice. Snowflake will adjust. Animals adapted better than humans to a change in environment. He doesn't want to adjust. I'm going to have to buy him a sweater. Maybe a pink one with bows on it. It was the good-natured ribbing of one male to another. Snowflake rubbed a massive paw over his face, and then glowered at Gavin like a child who'd been served liver. Amelia sucked back a smile. Their interactions convinced her Snowflake was indeed in Gavin's care. I don't think they make dog sweaters in Snowflake's size, although he might fit in your jacket. Good luck putting that on him. Not an option. Gavin's brows lowered. He shared my bed last night, despite my protests. He's not taking my coat, too. He passed Amelia on the way to the sink with the self-assured steps of a take-charge man, the kind of man who needed a little woman to clean up after him. And yet, he rinsed the mug. Thanks for warming us up. We've got to get back to the ski resort. I'm building a snow castle and setting up lights for the New Year's Eve show. I don't recommend pets going outside in this weather. The wind whipping down Blue Spruce Mountain could be brutal, and the snow, although gentle and sporadic today, would seep into coats, be they fur or polyester. And I wouldn't think you should be working outside either. The show must go on. Gavin flashed his lopsided smile and began putting his protective layers back on. Come on, Snowburn. Back to work. Snowflake rolled over. He might have snored. Snowburn. Gavin nudged him with his toe again. Don't make me find your tickle spot. Snowflake curled into a tight ball, his back to Gavin. Amelia laughed. He doesn't want to go. Gavin's scowl was half-hearted. Clearly, he had a soft spot for the dog. You know, Amelia couldn't believe she was doing this. Snowflake can stay with me. His dark eyebrows shot up to the universal surprise position, and he took a moment to study her face as if he couldn't believe she'd made the offer. Stay here. Well, at the clinic. Francis was going to kill her. As long as he gets along with other animals. Snowshoes loves animals of all shapes and sizes. Gavin hurried to the door, possibly worried she'd change her mind. In all fairness, I should warn you. He'll be a pain. Snowflake gave Gavin a sideways look. He'll be no trouble, Amelia reassured them both. He'll be a pain. Gavin mashed his knit cap on his head. Don't kid yourself. He drools. He's nosy. And he talks all the time. Snowflake grumbled something that sounded like, not all the time. Gavin moved to the door and his boots. Call me if you need me to come get him. He put his hand on the doorknob and glanced at her over his shoulder, a wickedly charming grin on his face that illuminated an empty space in her heart. Or if you change your mind about wanting help with that garland. Chapter 2. You lost the dog? Lacey, one of Gavin's business partners, straightened from packing snow into a big plastic tub with a shovel. Her normally serene features scrunched in concern. I'll organize a search party. Charlotte was always moving one step ahead. Or maybe she was tired of shoveling snow. A strand of red hair had escaped from beneath her knit cap and swung in the brisk wind, touching the freckles on her face as if connecting the dots. Stand down. Gavin picked up a shovel and tried to pick up his spirits. Snowbean found himself a dog-sitter. He blew out a breath. Having taken stock of the Blue Spruce Mountain Resort on the climb up the hill, things were looking grim. Oh, sure. The ski lift was working and the bunny slope was dotted with the ski patrol, checking the slopes before the grand opening on New Year's Day. But the snow castle they'd begun building this morning, the one they'd promised would be finished by New Year's Eve, was only outlined with one level of snow blocks. They'd had a dump truck deliver 2 loads of fresh snow. They'd started in the dark, shoveling snow into tubs, which froze fairly quickly in this weather. And then they carried the tubs to the castle outline and dumped the blocks out. The past few days he'd been feeling burnt out, the way he used to feel on a tour when he was ready for it to be over and was ready to move on. 6 days. They had 6 days to build a castle with lights and curving steps and a slide for the kiddos. Not to mention the light show they'd promised. His motto lately had been to lean on his friends when he needed strength. He didn't think his friends would be enough this time. Who did you Snowflake find? Charlotte asked, tucking her red hair back into her cap. I followed his trail down the mountain, Gavin said absently, still thinking about the challenge ahead of them. He prided himself on his ability to deliver the impossible. When he'd been the lights and sound guy for the Randall House Band, he'd pulled off light and sound extravaganzas on short notice with little power. He'd rearranged video backdrops when the band made last-minute changes to the set list. But this one, even the post office would have to concede this delivery might be impossible. He found the vet by the turn to the highway. Dr. Scrooge? Lacey's soft brown eyebrows nearly disappeared into her knit cap. That's Dr. Lawson to you. For some reason Gavin felt the need to rise to her defense, despite Dr. Scrooge's sometimes brisk bedside manner. FYI. I saw some Christmas spirit in her house. Lacey and Charlotte exchanged glances. Interested glances. Matchmaking glances. Don't get any ideas. He knew his business partners too well, having met them at college where they'd all volunteered for drama and music productions, Lacey with costumes, Charlotte with props and set design, Gavin with light and sound work. They'd roomed together in college for a few years, something that nearly gave his mother a heart attack and had amused Gavin's best friend Randall. A date is just what you need, Lacey teased. She's not my type. Having spent more than a few years as a rock band roadie, Gavin was used to women who were heavily made up, heavily dressed up, and heavily perfumed. Women who led the pack with a high heel and a hunger for what they wanted. By contrast, Amelia Lawson looked like someone's teenage kid's sister. Unbound light brown hair, no makeup, but as prickly in defense of her lack of Christmas spirit as a teen's defense of her boy band's legitimacy. Not that Dr. Lawson wasn't nice. But she was white bread when he preferred multigrain. There'd been no TV or music in her little cabin. Not much furniture either. Just a plain brown couch and 2 bar stools at the white granite kitchen peninsula. There was nothing on the log walls that said, "This is who I am." Even her mug had been plain white. The single most interesting thing about Dr. Lawson was her lack of holiday spirit. And for a man who'd made his living these past 2 months giving people in Christmastown a boost of holiday spirit, well, that was a non-starter. What's the harm in a coffee over at the teapot? Charlotte gently pushed his shoulder. You've been down in the dumps since Randall died. Grief wrapped its arms around Gavin's chest and gave him a bear hug. You gave me strength just standing by my side. A line from one of Randall's songs. Gavin worked hard to silence his voice. Listening to his childhood friend's songs clogged his throat like a fistful of packed snow. Living next door to one another and born 2 weeks apart, they'd been more like fraternal twin brothers than neighbors, each having more in common with the other than their own older blood brothers. Real men get over their grief, his father had said last June after Randall's unexpected death. He was a contractor and as stoic as a 2x4. Ladies. Gavin channeled his father's aloof persona. I don't have time for coffee. Or romance. Where are we in terms of progress? Gavin glanced up at the sky. It was going to snow again soon. Just 6 inches or so while they worked. Enough to make it unpleasant. We aren't much farther along than we were before Snowflake fled the scene, Lacey said sadly, looking winded as she leaned on her shovel. The altitude wasn't helping anyone's stamina. We hit a little speed bump. She nodded toward Ash Kincaid, their client, who was trudging up the steep walkway to check on them. And then she moved closer, lowering her voice. Ash was wondering if his circuits could handle the laser equipment, so I fired the machine up. She lifted her hand and exploded her fingers. Poof. Something went poof in Gavin's gut. I was hoping when they redid the electrical they'd beefed it up. Poof, Lacey said again. And Charlotte thought a light we buried in the base of the wall might have blown. Poppy grim-faced, Charlotte mimicked Lacey's 5-digit explosion. We'll have to dig it out and check before the next layer. We're screwed, aren't we? Lacey asked. The light could be dug out. The electrical problem would require some phone calls. In the meantime, we need more muscle on this castle. Gavin turned to Charlotte, who was the networker of the trio. Teenagers who'll work for minimum wage, hot chocolate, and a donut from Frosty's. I don't mess with electricity. Charlotte dug her cell phone from her pocket. But I can round up teenagers. Gavin turned to Lacey. If we get more workers, we'll need more tubs and shovels. Lacey nodded. I'll call Christmas Town Workshop. Otherwise known as the local hardware store. Ash. Gavin went to meet their client halfway down the incline, since the man's limp was showing. Lacey tells me there's an electrical issue. Ash frowned, although it wasn't clear whether his displeasure was because he was still getting used to his new prosthetic on uphill climbs or because of the electrical failure. Gavin was willing to bet it was a little of both. I've got Zach on the phone looking for the fuses. Ash thrust his hands in his pockets. I've got to tell you, it doesn't look good. Even if we did get the fuses, I don't think we can handle the load. Maybe we should. Get a generator. Gavin cut him off before Ash said nasty words like cancel or a refund. This was a big job, worth more than the profit they might make. If they could pull this off, doors to other events would open. Their business would expand from interior design, holiday decoration and light displays to include event production. In a small, remote town, they needed to be a jack of all trades to survive. When I was working outdoor concerts, we used generators all the time. They're noisy. Most run on diesel. But that'll make the light show self-sufficient. And you won't leave your customers in the dark in the bar. Thanks, that's a good solution. Ash slanted Gavin a savvy glance. And it won't cost more? No, and not to Ash anyway. Leave it all to me. Gavin smiled the way he imagined successful, worry-free business owners smiled. Ash was on to him. He gave Gavin the same smile back. Not reassuring. Not reassuring at all. Gavin hurried uphill, thinking about favors he might call in versus generator rental fees, and hourly wages for teens. Maybe he should have cut their losses and let Ash cancel. He reached Lacey and Charlotte, bringing them up to speed. You know a guy, right? Lacey's question was riddled with doubt. She thought they were doomed. From your roadie days? I know lots of guys and legit companies, too. I'm worried we'll be screwed because it's last minute and the holidays. Worry sparked in his chest like a failed circuit about to blow. Lots of people didn't work between Christmas and New Year's. And his contacts in the concert world, they could be anywhere in the world. We could buy one. Lacey's brave tone failed to translate to a brave face. I've seen them at home improvement stores. Gavin shook his head. What we need is considerably larger and considerably more expensive. Get on the phone with your contacts. Charlotte's voice was as crisp as a flat shovel scraping across thin ice. I've got a crew of teens coming over after lunch. Unfortunately, I just got a text from the Kincaids. Deer ate part of their lawn display. They need a patch job. She tapped her chest. I'll handle that. She was, after all, the repair queen. I guess it's just you and me until lunch. Gavin slung his arm over Lacey's shoulders and gave her a squeeze. The wind was dying down, which made the slope feel warmer, but the fat gathering clouds promised imminent snow. Not so fast. Charlotte had her nose in her phone again. Someone just filled out the contact form on our website. They want to consult on a kitchen remodel, and today is the only day they're free this week. I'm up for that. Lacey speared the pile of snow with her shovel. She excelled at meet and greets. Sorry, Gav. And then there was one. At least until after lunch. Hey, he called after their retreating backs. Send me up a sandwich with the reinforcements. Chapter 3. With a mighty ho-ho-ho, Snowflake and Amelia blew into the front door of the veterinary clinic like a snow flurry heralding a fresh winter storm. Amelia held on, laughing all the way. The dog spotted Francis behind the counter and continued his charge. He reared up on his hind legs and plopped his paws on the fake granite formica, along with some drool. Not a gray eyelash batted behind the receptionist's thick glasses. She leaned forward and tapped Snowflake's nose with an arthritis-ridden finger. You, sir, do not have an appointment. Off. Snowflake grumbled in a way that sounded like, row, and put all four paws back on the floor. You're late, Dr. Scrooge. Frances walked around the counter with the deliberate steps of the aged, aware of their fragility. She wore scrubs and orthopedic sneakers. Today's scrubs were lime green with large Grinch faces. She took possession of Snowflake's leash. I'm only a few minutes behind, Nurse Grinch. They were a pair. A widow who valued her independence and a veterinarian who hadn't imagined she'd be disowned by her Christmas-loving mother. You can't be their friend. Frances contradicted her words by rubbing Snowflake's big ears. You have to show them who the alpha is. Amelia knew who was the alpha at the clinic. Francis. What's wrong with him? The grandmother of 13 moved toward the infirmary in the back and gave Snowflake's leash a quick tug when he didn't follow. Heel or I'll find you a kennel in the back. Snowflake snorted in apparent disbelief, although Amelia didn't know whether it was over the kennel threat or Francis' use of the leash. Amelia smiled. Sometimes, she took her projection of animal feelings a bit too far. How was your Christmas? I went to Nellie's house yesterday. Those grandkids make nothing but noise. Francis had enough wrinkles to hide a wry smile if you weren't looking for it. Edward would have led them to Reindeer Meadow and organized a game of football. Edward being her deceased husband. The smile faded. Instead, those kids played football on a video game until it was time to go caroling. She harumphed and opened the door to the infirmary. Several animals occupied the wire cages that lined the wall, but the clinic was nowhere near capacity and hadn't been since Amelia took over. There was a small counter that served as Amelia's desk and lab. Her laptop sat next to a microscope. There was a quiet area to sit with nervous pets, locked supply cabinets with medications, and back doors to the exam rooms. On a positive note, Frances said. Nellie sent me home with enough turkey for the two of us. She patted Snowflake's head with her age-spotted hand. There's even enough for you. Her faded blue eyes found Amelia's gaze. Did your mother call? Amelia shrugged suddenly stiff shoulders. I didn't expect her to. A change of subject was in order. What do we have today? There's a Labrador in room 1. Frances handed her the chart hung by the door. Calvin swallowed a pair of his owner's thin polyester dress socks. Labradors never ceased to amaze Amelia with what they found edible. That's unusual. His owner works in the kitchen at the ski resort. They cooked a lot of prime rib last night. She leaned in closer. Truthfully, I can understand why the dog did it. His owner smells of au jus. Snowflake licked his chops. Is Calvin in distress? His vitals looked fine. Calvin is gassy. Frances took Calvin's chart and handed her the one for room 2. There's a Shih Tzu pup who's had stomach upset all night, vomiting and diarrhea. Apparently, she got a cow hoof for Christmas and chewed it to bits. Obstruction takes priority. Decision made, Amelia opened the back door to room 2. Snowflake tried to drag Frances after her. The old gal jerked his collar and shushed him when he tried to make growly smack talk. You may make new friends in the infirmary, young man, but only if you act like a gentleman. Amelia closed the exam room door and greeted little Jewel, who had wild white and black curls and was collapsed on the table. Amelia's examination was brief. Jewel's owner claimed she'd vomited a piece of hoof and hadn't been sick in over an hour. But the young dog was dehydrated and weak. Amelia gave Jewel a shot of antibiotic and sent her home with instructions to give her water every 15 to 30 minutes for the next few hours. If she won't drink, you can squirt a little water from a turkey baster in her mouth. Next was the chocolate Labrador. Calvin moaned as Amelia came in. He lay on the exam table, which was on the floor. While his owner held him steady, Amelia used the hydraulics to lift the table with Calvin on it to her level. The lab's belly was distended and he was a regular stink bomb, emphasis on regular and stink. He whimpered beneath her gentle exam, as if to say, I gotta go. I think we need a trip outside. Amelia lowered the table and led Calvin to a large covered pen that was sheltered from most of the wind and snow. 2 slimy socks later, and Calvin lay on the infirmary floor as spent as if he'd given birth. Snowflake touched his nose to Calvin's, turned and then splashed a paw in a water bowl. Water is an excellent idea, Snowflake. Thank you. Amelia caught Calvin's owner giving her an odd glance. He looked like he was just out of college and still of an age to care about appearances. At 30, having been bled on, vomited on, slobbered on, and defecated on, Amelia felt no embarrassment being seen conversing with animals. Don't tell me you don't talk to your dog. He grinned. Too often. I've just never seen a vet do it. Calvin lurched to his feet and walked gingerly to the water bowl. When he was done, Amelia put a hand beneath the Labrador's wet chin. If you promise to drink lots of water today, you can go home without a shot. But if you still feel yucky tomorrow, you'll have to come back in. She patted his head and gave him a tennis ball. It's our version of a sucker, she told the owner, who had his phone pointed her way. Did you film that? He lowered his phone, grinning like a kid. Yep. That's going to earn me a lot of likes on social media. Probably more hits than you putting your socks in the dirty clothes hamper. A zinger was in order. Really? He'd filmed her? Calvin left the infirmary with his tail at half-mast, but the ball clutched tightly in his mouth. Amelia performed her rounds, checking on the animals in the infirmary with Snowflake by her side. He left a trail of drool in their wake. The Saint Bernard was especially fond of cats. He'd press his broad head to their cages and then heave a deep sigh. Surprisingly, many felines found him irresistible, rubbing their faces against his and the bars. That dog's just like you. Frances appeared in the doorway. Talking their language. I wish I had the talent. You're fluent in people talk. Since she'd moved here, Amelia wasn't. Besides, together we almost make a whole person. You're good with people, too. Frances approached Snowflake and scratched him behind his ears. If you just tried a little harder, you'd have more business. If you put up Christmas decorations and showed up at some town events. Frances. Amelia shook her head. She was like her Christmas tree, not quite into the holiday spirit. I just don't fit in. Only because you don't want to. Frances grumbled with more growl than Snowflake. Someone's in the lobby with another rescue, probably looking for more charity. We could both use some more paying customers. Amelia sighed and glanced down at Snowflake. She's right. But if I make more money here, that means I have to deal with my family in Florida. Snowflake made a questioning sound, tilting his head. Family and money don't mix. Amelia met Snowflake's soft gaze. He rubbed his drippy mouth on her leg and then bumped his head against her thigh as if to say, "Don't worry about it." Amelia cut through room 1 and into the lobby. A large Maine Coon cat was bundled in a gray-blue Spruce Mountain Resort sweatshirt and held by an elderly man with a shock of white hair and a Santa-like belly. The feline was making a ruckus. Amelia stroked a thumb across her broad head. She treated dogs smaller than this cat. "What happened to you, little one?" The cat yowled louder. Snowflake pressed his nose against Amelia's unhappy patient and snuffled. The feline quieted. "That dog's a cat whisperer." The old man grinned. "This beast hasn't stopped caterwauling since she was found. Come inside, little one." Amelia ignored the way Frances tossed her hands behind the counter. Nurse Grinch wanted Dr. Scrooge to ask about payment first. When the old man settled the cat on the table, Amelia crooned, "What happened to you?" A guest at the ski lodge slid off the road and into a tree. This sweet girl tumbled on her hood. I think she broke a leg. Snowflake had followed them in. He rested his chin on the exam table. His muzzle rested in a puddle of slobber. Occasionally, he stretched forward to snuffle the cat's head, which seemed to calm the patient. "I hope you didn't get scared and bite your rescuer." Amelia began her exam with the cat's thick legs. Maine Coons didn't have the delicate bone structure of house cats. 3 limbs in, Amelia found what she suspected was a broken leg. The cat flinched and yowled. "She didn't bite me, despite being in pain." The old man rested his arms on his jolly paunch. "I'm Henry. I work up at the resort." Amelia made a small noise of acknowledgement as she listened to the cat's heartbeat. It was fast, her breathing rapid. "Haven't met you before," Henry said with the air of a man who enjoyed conversation. "Years ago, this used to be a dog kennel for a breeder. And then a vet's office, of course." Amelia made the same small noise and checked the feline's gums. They were pale. She slung her stethoscope around her neck and looked into the cat's yellow eyes. "You, my dear, are in shock, which explains why you're acting like a lady. We'll need x-rays to determine the extent of damage, and once your leg is wrapped, you'll need bed rest." She glanced up at Henry, who'd been watching the exchange with a benevolent grin. "Who do you belong to?" "She's feral." There was a sadness to Henry's statement that Amelia related to. He had a tender spot for animals without a home, too. "I've seen her around catching birds and squirrels." He lowered his voice, cheeks coloring slightly. "This isn't going to cost a lot, is it? I can't keep her." A paying customer? Frances was going to love him. And not be as happy with Amelia's compromise for the Good Samaritan. "If you could pay for the medication, I'll handle the rest of the cost of care for." The cat didn't have a name. Snowflake barked. "Ho ho. Ho ho it is." Amelia smiled. She dug her fingers into the ruff at his neck, giving him a good scratch. Her finger caught on his collar. "What's this? A secret compartment?" Chapter 4. It was hard to believe anybody could be sweaty in 20-degree weather, but someone was. And it wasn't Gavin. Charlotte and Lacey had left 2 hours ago to take care of other clients. He'd replaced the blown light in the base wall and had made several blocks of snow. The teenage brigade had arrived with more tubs and shovels, but one of his 5 workers was a caution. Gavin stood next to the slight and sweaty worker. "It's Tyler, right?" The boy nodded, working up a smile he wasn't standing behind. "You feeling okay?" The boy nodded again, his smile fading. He looked like he was coming down with the flu. Or maybe he never got exercise. A strong wind gust would blow him over. "I can do this." Gavin wasn't so sure. They were lucky. The snow had dropped a few inches before the boys arrived. And now the clouds seemed stuck on the mountain above them. The slopes were beautiful. Pristine white set against snow-covered pines. The dark wood of the lodge was softened by snow-covered rooftops. A winter wonderland. One that Ash hoped would receive more appreciation and attendance because of the snow castle and light show. So why did Gavin feel like Alice trapped behind the looking glass? Because he was behind schedule and now he had to baby a kid who shouldn't be out here in the first place. I can make it as long as I don't have to carry the ice blocks far, Tyler qualified, chin raised against the other boys' snorts of disbelief. He knew he wasn't as fast at shoveling snow or as strong as the rest in carrying 20-gallon tubs filled with snow. Gavin had to admire the kid's guts even if it didn't ease the churn in his own. I like your honesty. Tyler grinned and resumed shoveling. Gavin checked his phone. No messages or texts about generators. This wasn't looking good. When the light began fading mid-afternoon, Gavin had the boys call it a day. Snow was falling again. The castle walls were 5 feet high. They just might finish the walls and turrets tomorrow and move on to the stairs and slide. Be back tomorrow at 9, Gavin said. I'll bring the hot chocolate and donuts from Frosty's. No one said anything. Some of the boys took a step back. What's the deal? Had he worked them too hard? Were they quitting? We have high school basketball practice in the morning, said the tallest teen, who might be Sam. Not me, Tyler piped up with the kind of enthusiasm that was almost painful to witness. I'll be here. Extra marshmallows on my hot chocolate. A couple of the boys sniggered. Okay, Gavin said, standing alone, trying to hide his disappointment by checking his cell phone. Maybe he'd get better reception downhill. The rest of you be here as soon as you can. He revised expectations of finishing the castle. One more row of blocks and he'd install another set of bulbs to make the walls glow with light and color. Gavin looked up and realized he was alone, except for Tyler. I thought you could use some help cleaning up. Tyler held a shovel in each hand. You shouldn't leave your tools out here. He was right. Grab some more shovels and I'll get the tubs. He'd put them in the bed of his pickup, which had a hard cover. I've seen your displays around town, Tyler said, when they reached the pickup. His face had some color to it, for once. Laser lights shooting all different directions. Light strings strobing to music. Totally awesome. Is what you're doing here going to be any different? The shiny enthusiasm in his eyes was as bright as a light show finale. Gavin felt an ego stroke, like balm to his stressed-out brain. The kitchen and bathroom remodels they'd done the first few months' boxes and bows had been open hadn't been challenging for the son of a carpenter. And the holiday displays weren't rocket science either. Sure, it was fun to program lights to music. But after the first few, the thrill had gone. If I tell you about the show, he said to Tyler. You won't spoil the surprise? Tyler beamed. No, sir. Have you seen the opening ceremonies at the Olympics? At the teen's nod, Gavin felt his excitement build. Have you seen the way they project pictures and imagery on the stadium floor? Oh, yeah, roads and patterns and stuff. Gavin turned, framing the bunny slope with his thumbs and forefingers. This isn't just a light show. It's a mini-movie projected on the snow. Cool. Tyler shrugged deeper into his coat, unable to hide his shiver. It wasn't quite 4, but the sun was disappearing and the temperature dropping along with it. Gavin's enthusiasm faded. If you're sick, I don't want you to come out here tomorrow. I'm not sick. I'm out of shape. So much angst. So much passion. Gavin remembered what it was like to cover a teenage lie. But even half a body was better than being down to 4 workers. Okay, the show must go on. I'll see you tomorrow. A few minutes later, Gavin parked his truck in front of Amelia's cabin. His back hurt. He wanted to collect Snowy, eat pizza, and watch whatever bowl game was on TV. He checked his phone for messages. Nada. He hoped people were on vacation. He hoped he hadn't burned bridges in the concert industry. Or, worse, been forgotten. That thought stung. Amelia's log cabin was a small rectangle in the midst of snowy pines. Other than her large deck and French doors, it looked like many other Maine cabins. It suited Amelia's averageness. He climbed the porch steps much slower than he had earlier in the day. Warm yellow light spilled through the French doors onto the deck. He could see into Amelia's small living room and open kitchen. She was behind the counter with oven mitts on, arms raised, dancing to music he couldn't hear. Surprise stopped him on the top step. Amelia was dancing? She was a decent dancer, too. Hips swayed, long hair swung. Her oven mitt hands clapped above her head. He was mesmerized, drawn forward on silent feet, until he heard the strains of a familiar chorus, the bass of a familiar voice, and realized she was listening to the Randall House Band. His lungs expelled air, his throat closed, and his ears buzzed with sudden silence, as if a plug had been pulled on a two-story speaker. Amelia stopped dancing, which might have struck Gavin as a shame if he hadn't been sucked into an emotional iceberg, frozen by loss. Why couldn't she have been a fan of One Direction? She gestured for Gavin to come inside with a half-smile and half-shrug, as if to say, "Oh, well. You caught me." Gavin swallowed and suddenly he could hear again. But he couldn't move until the rock anthem strains of Why faded. Only then did his leaden feet shuffle forward, his cold hand grasp the knob on the door. When he entered, Amelia turned the music off on her phone, and then held a finger to her lips. Shh! Snowflake's sleeping. Gavin shut the door behind him. Everything in the cabin felt different. Not white bread. Not boring. Not average. I guess I shouldn't expect Dr. Scrooge to play Christmas carols. Closet rocker. She put a portable speaker beneath the sink, returning the counter to uncluttered status. She'd showered since he'd seen her last. Her hair was a wet, darker brown and her t-shirt said, "Bah, humbug." She was a lover of the Randall House Band, a good dancer, and could laugh at herself. A fire roared behind the grate, matching an unnamed emotion that crackled to life inside Gavin. Snowy was sprawled in front of the hearth. The dog may have been snoring, but he wasn't sleeping. He peered at Gavin through slitted eyes. Amelia's cabin smelled like gingerbread and laughter and home. Which was crazy. Gavin had a home on the town square, a Victorian he, Lacey and Charlotte were remodeling. We had a busy day at the clinic. He's worn out. Amelia's cheeks were tinged pink and her tone was as warm and soft as the steam rising off the cookies she removed from the oven. There were more cooling on a rack. Yeah. Well, he stopped talking. It was Monday night. Pizza night at Boxes and Bows. Gavin was in no hurry to get there. There was something just as appetizing in front of him. A woman revealing her layers. Layers he hadn't suspected she had. Layers that hinted at character and strength. You gave me strength just standing by my side. He willed Randall to shut up. Snowflake is quite the talker. You told me, but, she kept her voice low and raised brown eyes to his. I was surprised by him. Gavin was surprised by her. By how her glance negated his need to leave. By how her glance melted through him like icing over an overbaked cookie, softening the hard parts and easing his angst over deadlines and sick kids and the lack of generators. I've had animals talk to me before, Amelia continued, returning her attention to the cookie sheet. But never non-stop. He wanted her to look at him. It was as necessary as his next breath. As necessary as the North Star to travelers and a tour bus to a roadie. He sat on a stool at the counter across from her. Gingerbread separated them. Gingerbread and unanswered questions like, what's your favorite Randall House Band song? Are you a classic rocker as in Led Zeppelin? Or a new style rocker as in Coldplay? Was she up for a debate about where to find the best burgers in America? Or was she one of those foodies who cared for more than the basics on her plate? Instead of focusing on the important, Gavin found himself asking the stupidest question imaginable. Are you Christmas Town's version of Dr. Dolittle? Talking to animals. That's a great parlor trick. Her spatula froze midair and Gavin could have sworn Snowflake let out a grumble of disapproval. Her brown eyes did meet his then, but the warmth of a shared appreciation for one of Randall's songs was evaporating as quickly as cooling cookies. I'll box these up for you so you can be on your way. Those are for me? Gavin wasn't normally a gingerbread person, but her cookies smelled delicious. Shouldn't I be giving you something? You're the one who did me a solid. Snowflake was no trouble. Her Dr. Scrooge bedside manner returned like the wind from the north, brisk and bone-numbing. No trouble at all. Gavin doubted that. The snowman was a 150-pound spoiled prince. He'd forced his way into Gavin's truck this morning. And then he'd forced his way out of Gavin's truck when he'd stopped at the teapot for coffee. He'd sniffed every female going in and out of the shop. What was up with that? And when Gavin had stopped to get gas on his way to the ski lodge, Snowflake had forced his way out again. He'd run over and sat on the boot of a woman pumping gas. Gavin suspected Darren of training the dog to be his date magnet wingman. The dog had a thing for women. Amelia loaded the cookies in a Christmas tin like she was on a high-speed production line. Wait a minute. Gavin emerged from the stupor her dancing had put him in. If they call you Dr. Scrooge, why do you have a Christmas tin? She glanced at Snowy, who continued to pretend to be asleep. Bless him. I bought this place online. Sight unseen. Lots of people screen properties with online listings nowadays. What does that have to do with the tin? Nothing, everything. She blew out a frustrated breath and started over. I'd never been to Maine before I bought this practice. I hadn't stepped foot on this property before making an offer. I bought it through a property trade. My practice in Miami for this one. I'm confused. What was she talking about? The tin. I asked about the tin, Dr. Scrooge. She bristled at the moniker, a nose-crinkling, brow-lowering bristle. I moved here in the summer, but I couldn't open until I was licensed to practice in the state. So while Christmas town residents were gearing up for the holiday, I was hunkered down here with my nose in a study guide. I had no idea the town went to such great lengths to celebrate Christmas. He was beginning to see where she was going, but the town is named after the holiday. Amelia snatched up the oven mitts and threw them in a drawer. I didn't research the town, okay? I needed to get away from Florida, and this was the first place that accepted my offer. She folded a dish towel, shook it out and folded it again. I opened in November, and people started dropping by. Not with their pets, but to tell me what I should be doing. A wreath showed up on my clinic's door. Garland lined the porch. This was my place, and suddenly, it was being decorated by Secret Santa. She pounded her fist on the towel. I felt manipulated. So I took it all down and put it in a box on the porch. And after Christmas, my receptionist told me about the nickname. You were decoration shamed? Gavin's blood pounded with shared indignation. Tell me who it was and I'll go short-circuit some of their outdoor bulbs. Gavin was surprised to find he meant it. He wasn't and had never been the neighborhood hoodlum. But for her. At the time, I was upset, but in telling you about it, I just feel like I made a mountain out of a bucket of sand. The regret in her quiet voice seemed to pull her eyebrows together. I've been holding a grudge about a holiday. She flicked the top of her starless tree. Is that why you only have a miniature Christmas tree? No stocking? No lights? Her gaze shuddered. She slid the tin across the counter to him. Curiosity danced across the back of Gavin's neck. If this is a grudge match, I hate to tell you, but I think you're in the ring alone. People in town are way too busy to be worried about you. And yet you knew my nickname, which means somebody's still aware I've got no holiday spirit. I mean, even my assistant has taken up my defense. She calls herself Nurse Grinch, sidekick to Dr. Scrooge. Everything softened in her face, from her brown eyes to her small smile. She was clearly appreciative of the one person in town who'd shown her loyalty. She deserved better. Did you celebrate Christmas growing up? Her lips flattened and pressed together, as if to better hold her secrets. If he wanted to know some of her secrets, he'd have to trade one of his. You know, I don't have the best history with the holiday either. She scoffed. So did Snowy. My parents have a big Christmas party every year. They invite all my dad's clients, all his suppliers, and all his workers. There's booze and so much food, my mother always ends up throwing food out days later. His chest grew tight and his nose stung. Maybe he should have chosen a different memory. He plunged on anyway. Our family celebration was much more conservative. Turkey, mashed potatoes, nothing fancy. And gifts? My brother and I each received one gift from our parents, a small envelope with $25 cash. He'd been less important than a business connection to his father. The neighbors adopted me at Christmas. In high school, I got in on the ground floor with a band, working their sound system and running the lights. For more than a decade, I spent every Christmas on the road. But the guys on the road were more like family than my own blood relatives. We exchanged gifts. Meaningful gifts that probably cost a lot less than $25. That's where I found the magic of the holiday. He stared at her expectantly. Amelia's eyes were wide and her arms locked over her chest, not in anger, but crossed and wrapped around her ribs the way you did when things got bad. Snowy sighed. Gavin waited. She cleared her throat. My mom celebrates Christmas 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Her words were low and hesitant, like she was testing a microphone and feared speaking louder might result in ear-shrieking reverb. Growing up, we had Christmas dinner every Sunday. We rotated holiday decorations once a month. We had Christmas dishes, Christmas napkins, Christmas tablecloths. Our house was painted red and green. In Florida, she added for emphasis in case he needed context. Mom wore Christmas t-shirts and Christmas sweaters. She had earrings that lit up like Christmas trees, and she made the dog wear fabric antlers. I didn't think much of it, until I reached middle school and Mom tried to insist I wear the holiday every day, too, like a human billboard for Santa. Ouch. Every child's rite of passage. If you can survive middle school, you can survive anything. Anything? Randall's voice seemed to ask. Snowy stared at Gavin. Almost anything, Gavin silently amended. Anyway. Thank God for my dad. Amelia gathered her hair and twisted it over her shoulder, staring at the Christmas tin with hunger in her eyes, but he was reading her mood better now. It was acceptance she was hungry for. When I moved here, I needed separation and I shouldn't complain that I got it. What you got probably felt much like what you had in Florida. Gavin spoke softly enough to draw Amelia's attention. I apologize on behalf of the town citizens and wish your next Christmas to be filled with light and color. Her lips tilted up at the corners. You do realize you have no authority to make such an apology. It was worth a try. He shrugged, resting his elbows on the counter. Why let someone else tell you who you are? Or how to celebrate? Amelia heaved a sigh and leaned on the counter toward him. I don't know who I am when it comes to Christmas. And since it's just me, why should I care? Maybe you should get out a little more, Gavin suggested. I've never seen you in town. I mostly shop elsewhere. If you went in town, you could say hi to folks. You could talk to people and they'd start to think of you as more than Dr. Scrooge. And then he surprised himself by saying, why don't you join me and my roommates for dinner? Snowy sat up, a drool drop clinging to his jowls. I couldn't impose. So quick to reject him, despite the hunger in her eyes for more companionship than her sidekick Nurse Grinch and some sick pets could offer. Why not? I owe you double favors. He tapped the tin. Dog sitting and cookie gifting. Besides, it's pizza night. Plenty for everyone. Snowy padded over to Amelia, sat at her foot and leaned against her leg. Love brimmed from the slow swish of his white tail to his massive face, tilted up at her. If Gavin snuggled close and brimmed with love, would he win this woman's heart? The thought had him backing toward the door, but not backing away from the idea of her coming home with him. See? Even Snowburp wants you to come. Chapter 5. Try not to lead the conversation with your lack of holiday enthusiasm, Gavin said when he met Amelia on the walk in front of his house, which was also his place of business, boxes and bows. He carried her Christmas tin and didn't stop to appreciate the beauty of his home. Shades of Mrs. Claus. His house was perfect. The Victorian shimmered with more lights than Amelia's mother had ever managed to string on their home in Florida. It may not have been the grandest house on the square by day, but Gavin and his roommates had made the most of the Victorians' elegant lines at night. There was a big Christmas tree in each window and a huge wreath on the door. Seeing the twinkling white lights and shiny baubles was like showing a drug to a drug addict. Suddenly, Amelia wanted a tree. A big tree. One that was too big for the cabin. Suddenly, she wanted to bake and gift treats. Suddenly, she wanted a Christmas card list. And garlands strung on the porch railing, real pine boughs, not the plastic greenery. Amelia drew a deep breath. Christmas was past. And she was Dr. Scrooge. Gavin opened the door and stepped aside to let her in. With his drooly dreads, Snowflake trotted ahead of her to gallop up the stairs. This is our showroom. Gavin paid it no attention, dismissing it with a wave. It can be a bit overwhelming. Overwhelming? Amelia didn't know where to look. A display of showerheads caught her eye. Countertop samples. Cabinet doors. Hardware. Pictures of gorgeous kitchens and bathrooms. A rack of throw pillows. Books of soft fabric in rich colors. Suddenly, she wanted to remodel her cabin. Amelia, Gavin said quietly from the bottom of the stairs. He held out his hand. Don't look. So she didn't. She fixed her eyes on Gavin. On his broad shoulders and that slightly bent nose and his endearing smile. Her stomach did a backhanded somersault, the kind that went along with much anticipated dates. Whoa. Gavin was right. She needed to get out more often. Her mind was as willing to wrap itself around the possibility of Gavin as her man, as it had been moments earlier to remodeling the cabin. He was just repaying a favor and she wasn't in a financial position to do anything to the cabin. Feminine laughter mixed with the giggles of children. Amelia dug in her heels just out of Gavin's reach. Something was wrong here. I thought you said your roommates were having pizza. She'd imagined he lived in a bachelor pad and that there'd be beat-up couches, a large screen television, and guys in wrinkled clothing. My roommates are my business partners, both women. One of which is dating a guy with kids. Gavin stepped forward to claim her arm and then he led her up 2 flights of stairs to the kitchen, where a crowd had gathered around a big farm table. On one side of the table was a long bench. The other side had 5 chairs with fabric covers. The walls had white beadboard on the bottom, finished with a chair rail. The holiday theme continued here as well. There were poinsettias on the table, between red crystal bowls filled with gold Christmas balls. Pine garland was draped over the windows. No wonder Gavin challenged Amelia on her Christmas boycott. He lived in Santa's house. Everybody, Gavin called for the room's attention. Say hi to Amelia. Hi, Amelia, came the chorused reply. The women, a brunette and a redhead, beamed at Amelia. Gavin hung on to her arm when she would have put a friendly amount of space between them. Amelia, this is Lacey and Michael, Charlotte and Grant. Addison and Wesley are Grants. He grinned down on her. There'll be a test on names later. You're late. Charlotte, the redhead, gave him a sisterly slug in the shoulder. You owe me pizza money because it was your night to pay. I'll chip in. Amelia reached into her purse. You won't. Gavin stayed her hand. You're my guest. Sit, eat, relax. He guided her into an empty space on the bench. His 2 roommates exchanged glances. Don't you mean date? Lacey's smile was as innocent as a Disney princess. Amelia's cheeks heated. No, he doesn't. Feeling out of her element, she stood. Gavin's hand landed on her shoulder. He gently pushed her back down. She's the dog sitter. Snowflake appeared at Amelia's side with a grumbly growl that sounded like, they're teasing him, not you. His breath was owed to kibble, but his gaze was warm and comforting. Snowflake says to ignore Lacey, the little girl, Addison said. Her thin, frizzing brown hair was like an angel's halo. Amelia stroked Snowflake's soft fur, unable to resist a grateful smile for the child who understood animals. But she wasn't out of the roommate interrogation yet. Charlotte's freckled brow clouded. Where have I run across you before? I run the vet clinic out by the ski resort. Amelia braced herself for name recognition. No. That's not it. Charlotte snapped her fingers. You're on my list. Gavin had been filling a paper plate with pizza. His head came up, suspicion in his eyes. What list? Between Snowflake and Gavin, Amelia felt oddly protected. The list. Charlotte glanced from Gavin to Lacey, and then she pushed her hair away from her forehead. The list I'm always talking about. The list of people we want as clients next year. She drew a deep breath and turned to Amelia with a smile that was more hello, client than hello, dating material for my roommate. I love that you don't have decorations up. Do you know how hard it is to sell to do-it-yourselfers? No, now it was Amelia's brow that was clouded. Gavin set the plate with large pizza slices in front of her, one of pepperoni, one of combination, and took a second plate. It's a hard sell, Lacey said. Although starting a business is all about selling, I never wanted to be a salesperson. I don't like to sell either, Amelia admitted and was immediately embraced by the two women, at least in theory. The pizzas were demolished fairly quickly amidst light-hearted banter. Amelia was surprised to find she was enjoying herself. Snowflake grumbled his displeasure at Gavin's feet. His drool was longer than a strand of licorice. Amelia wiped at it with a napkin. Snowflake says he loves pepperoni. The little boy grinned. His name was Wesley and he had an adorable gap between his teeth. And no one gave him any. Charlotte put Amelia's Christmas tin in the middle of the table and removed the lid. The smell of gingerbread competed with the lingering aroma of pepperoni. Snowflake sat up and grumbled in a long string, a complaint about something, but of what, Amelia had no idea. Snowflake wants a cookie. Addison selected a cookie, but instead of giving it to Snowflake, she sat back down as if she was going to eat it herself. Oh, hang on. Amelia put her hand over the tin. These are Snowflake's cookies. All eyes turned to Amelia, as if she just said she didn't believe in Santa. I found this compartment in Snowflake's collar with a recipe card for Snowflake's biscuits. She fiddled with the dog's collar until she freed the folded index card. She held it up. The recipe had intrigued her so much, she'd copied it. These cookies are for the dog? Lacey left the table to open the freezer, poking around inside. There's no ice cream in here. And I didn't bake anything, because Gavin said he was bringing gingerbread. She glared at him. Charlotte held her hands out as if to keep people in their seats. Lots of people don't have dessert. My hips won't miss one night without it. These cookies are for the dog? Gavin pushed Amelia's hand away. I've been fantasizing about having gingerbread since you took them out of the oven. He snagged one and smelled it like it was the finest glass of wine. Snowflake barked. No, no, no. The kids giggled. Snowflake said, mine. Wesley sat on his knees on his chair and bounced enthusiastically. Mine, 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 Addison built on her brother's report. Gavin glanced at Amelia with a cautious look. What did you put in these? The recipe isn't all that different from a regular gingerbread cookie, Amelia admitted. There's no liver or canned dog food if that's what you're worried about. Snowflake smacked his chops, sending a cascade of slobber to the floor. And then he barked again, louder this time. No, no, no. The adults at the table shushed him. Here goes nothing. Gavin waved the cookie in front of his nose one last time, giving the kids the giggles, and then took a big bite. I'm not that desperate for dessert. Lacey sat back down at the table. How was it? Charlotte asked Gavin, her wide grin making her freckles glow. Amelia had expected Snowflake to bark or howl. Instead, he sat back and gave Gavin a doggy grin. Here you go, fella. Amelia rewarded him with a gingerbread treat. Thank you for sharing. Snowflake swallowed it without chewing. Drool hung from his jowls in ever-growing drips. He watched Gavin take another cookie, emitting a low growl. Gavin took pity on him and handed him a biscuit. After making a second cookie disappear, Snowflake rubbed the side of his face against Gavin's leg, grumbling softly. Snowflake thinks you're going to leave him at home tomorrow, Wesley said. I am. Gavin wiped the dog's mouth with a napkin and tossed it on his empty paper plate. Sorry, boy. No, no, no. Snowflake turned pleading eyes Amelia's way. Don't look at me. Amelia pointed at Gavin. Look at him. Snowflake rested his head on Gavin's thigh and raised big brown eyes with a plea. How can you resist that face? Amelia teased. Gavin made a face of his own, one that said he wasn't going to be the sole pushover at the table. The only way Snowflake is coming to work with me tomorrow is if my dog sitter is available. Snowflake turned his head over his shoulder to look at Amelia. She was struck by a cocoon of inclusion in this circle of friends, with this dog, with this man. Gavin's dark eyes twinkled with mischief and Snowflake's with unconditional love. Amelia wanted this to be real. She wanted friendships and a relationship and something more than the isolated life she'd been leading. All eyes around the table were on Amelia, waiting for her to say yes. She felt they were waiting for her to say yes to the start of something special, not a day of dog sitting. She barely had enough breath to cave in. Oh, all right. Snowflake wriggled and bumped her with his head, his version of a love tap. The cleanup was noisy. Kids picked up plates and bagged the trash. Charlotte and her boyfriend made it a family affair to take the bag out. From there, they were saying goodnight, as Grant needed to get the kids home. Lacey walked her boyfriend to the front door. Gavin went down to the showroom to take a call as Lacey returned to the kitchen. You want a tour of the house? Lacey didn't wait for Amelia to answer. She grabbed a cookie and called Snowflake, heading to the common room. You've already seen the first floor. It's the most finished floor in the house. We're working our way up. Snowflake led them down to the hall. We live on this floor. Lacey showed Amelia a storage room and 2 offices that were decorated to suit feminine sensibilities. When did you and Gavin meet? Today. It seemed like she'd known him longer. A whole week maybe. This wasn't a date. If she said it often enough, someone might believe her. Gavin moves fast when he likes someone, which isn't often. Apologies. We haven't done much up here. Lacey led the way down the hall. Rose wallpaper was peeling off the walls. If Amelia lived here, she'd be peeling off a strip every time she passed. I won't show you Charlotte's room because it's a mess. And my room is. Let's just say I didn't make my bed. She passed up that door, too. Here's Gavin's room. I know you want to look. I don't want to appear nosy. Amelia peeked in anyway. It looked like a cheap flop house, the kind people rented by the hour. The walls were bare. The bedspread a boring, solid burgundy. A small table sat next to the bed. His room had the necessities, a lamp and a clock radio. There was nothing to indicate someone lived here, that someone considered it their home. And then Amelia spotted something. What's that bag in the corner? It looks like his go bag. Lacey bent and poked it. He used to have that packed at college so he could leave for a concert at a moment's notice. But that can't be. He's not going anywhere. Lacey didn't sound convinced, and she frowned all the way down to the second story. Lacey stopped at a doorway, reached in and turned on the light. This is Gavin's office. The office had unframed tour posters for the Randall House Band pinned to a wall and not much else. It was as bare and monochrome as the showroom, and his partner's offices were multifaceted and colorful. Did he just move in? No, Lacey frowned, walking inside and turning around. He's a minimalist. Look, there's his rally monkey hanging from the coat rack. And his jar of concert ticket stubs. There's a picture of him with Randall Cummings. He never goes anywhere without that. They were like brothers. Hit him hard when Randall died. It had hit the world hard. An up-and-coming artist taken too soon by cancer. But for Gavin, he'd lost his friend. And maybe he'd mentioned he'd worked on concert tours, maybe he'd lost his job as well. Lacey was chattering about connecting with Charlotte and Gavin over the summer at their college reunion and deciding to start a business, following Snowflake, who was moseying down to the first floor. Amelia followed slowly, thinking. Gavin didn't appear to be settling in for the long haul here. Had he, like her, jumped at an opportunity while still buried in grief? Would he, like her, have some regrets but make the best of it? Or would he return to a life on the road? Gavin waited for Amelia in the showroom, standing in front of the fantasy Christmas tree. He wore a gray hoodie over his blue jeans. She could imagine him standing in front of a similar tree. Their tree. With her. It was time for Dr. Scrooge and her overactive imagination to go. She put on her jacket. He smiled, opening the front door for her. I bet you won't think of yourself as Dr. Scrooge anymore. Amelia turned when she got to the bottom step. I think Dr. Scrooge is part of me now. Impulsively, she laid a hand on his cheek, felt the stubble there and tried not to feel anything else. I had a good time tonight. But like the shine of Christmas, it wasn't to last. Gavin's presence here was like snowflakes, temporary. She removed her hand from his cheek, feeling foolish. Do you like the Randall House Band? He asked abruptly when she would have turned to go. They've been a favorite of mine since college. I was sorry to hear about Randall's death. I saw you had a picture with him upstairs. We were friends. His gaze drifted to the trees sparkling with lights in the town square. Born 2 weeks apart. Lived next door to each other our whole lives. He had a way of talking about the future, about his dreams, that made you believe they'd come true. And they did. He was my hero for that. So few people accomplish anything in their lifetime and he, well, I imagined a different end to his story. He stared into her eyes, and she knew. She knew he was still grieving for his friend. It was cold. It was snowing. She hadn't put on her gloves or her knit cap. The wind bit at her nose and her ears. Despite the cold and the snow and the impossibility of it all, Amelia didn't want the moment to end, because if it did, he'd leave. He'd leave town and she'd go back to being Dr. Scrooge, who was only understood by Nurse Grinch. Cars drove past. Snowflake pressed his nose to the frosted window pane, giving the Christmas tree there the shakes. Amelia's lungs felt frozen, and yet somehow she managed to blurt, I don't understand why you can't stay. Gavin drew back. Who said I was going anywhere? Snowflake howled. You have no roots here, Amelia rasped. Not so much as a nail on the wall. I've got a stake in this business. His jaw was thrust out, but he didn't put a lot of fight in his words. You don't see it. She dug in her purse for her Subaru keys, suddenly angry when she had no right to be. He's not mine. Her heart panged. And she'd only known him a day. Mere hours. Gavin moves fast when he likes someone, Lacey had said. She clutched her keys in her hand. When you were a roadie, it was with the Randall House Band? He nodded, a quick jerk of the head. You're still grieving for Randall and the life you had. Stop, her inner voice cried. You're driving him away. She drew a deep breath and shut out the voice in her head, because the need to make him see was so strong, it overrode any feelings of her own. And when you stop grieving, you're going to leave Christmas Town. And me. Chapter 6. Bed hog. The deep voice drifted into Gavin's consciousness. He pried his eyes open. It was dark, but it was always dark in the morning in Maine. Bad dream, he thought. Amelia's words had kept him awake long into the night. He'd been plugging along, thinking he belonged here, thinking he was committed long-term. But her words had hooked a feeling of discontent and dragged it to the surface. He used to bring millions of dollars of equipment to life to the roaring enthusiasm of stadium crowds. Now, he could just as easily be replaced by teenagers with strong backs. Charlotte was a whiz at wiring the basics. It was only the bigger jobs, like the one at the Blue Spruce Mountain Resort, that required his expertise. Paws dug into Gavin's back and pushed him to the edge of the bed. Snowcracker, Gavin grumbled. Get off the bed. Make me. A grumbly reply. Gavin sat up so fast he got a head rush. He fumbled with the bedside lamp and knocked it over. It took him a few moments to right it and turn it on. No one was in his bedroom except Snowy, who was sprawled across his queen-sized bed as if he didn't have to share it with anyone. Fantastic. Now not only was he doubting his career choice, but he was hearing voices. And I didn't even drink last night. He had 5 minutes until his alarm went off. He pressed the button to turn off the alarm and headed to the shower. Wake me when breakfast is ready. Gavin whirled. Again, he was alone. He jabbed at his clock radio button repeatedly. A classic rock tune blared mid-chorus. Stay by Jackson Browne. Snowy rolled over and grumbled. I prefer Taylor Swift in the morning. Gavin froze. Not cold froze. But ice in his veins froze. The dog was not talking, because that was not possible. Gavin shook himself like Snowy did when he wanted to rid himself of snow. I'm getting as bad as Amelia, projecting what the dog is saying. And now he was talking to himself. Later, showered, dressed, and working on his first cup of coffee, Gavin called Snowflake to breakfast. Come on, Snow Bunny. Outside before kibble. Gavin stood at the kitchen back door drinking his coffee and staring into the darkness. The forecast for today? More light snow showers. There was nothing light about his thoughts. Was Amelia right? He was questioning every decision he'd made since Randall's funeral. Snow Bunny. Get your butt down here. Snowy entered the kitchen, yawning and dragging his feet. He greeted Lacey with a soft woof. Gavin opened the door. After you, Snow Tire. Snowy emitted those grumbles Gavin was starting to know so well, only this time it sounded like, how hard is it to remember my name? The big dog crossed the porch and picked his way down the icy stairs to the backyard. Can't believe you're leaving. Didn't figure you for a quitter. For a moment, Gavin didn't know if he was talking to himself, hearing the dog, or replaying words in his head. Randall's words. The lines of a song. Didn't figure you for a quitter. Didn't think you'd leave me lonely and bitter. Maybe this was what his father had been trying to warn him about. Grief did crazy things to your head. There was 2 feet of accumulated snow on the ground. Snowy sank in the drifts and barked. Cocoa cold. Gavin stepped out on the porch with his coffee, closing the door behind him. Hurry it up. Snowy walked beneath the deck with a grumbled, don't watch me. Gavin was losing his mind. You're driving me crazy, Snowburp. He stepped back inside and asked Lacey, do I have a fever? She stopped mixing whatever treat she had planned to offer in the office today and turned to him. Please don't tell me you can't go to work today. Lacey laid a cool palm on his forehead. No fever. No playing hooky with Dr. Scrooge. I asked you not to call her that. Gavin rubbed his temples. Are you sure I'm not feverish? The dog is talking to me. Gavin, that dog talks to everyone, Lacey scolded. Let me in. Did you hear that? Gavin demanded. He asked to be let in. Clearly. He was at the door and made a rumbly sound. Lacey let the dog in. Even I could have guessed what he was saying. Are you practicing your dog speak for Amelia? I like her. Me, too, Snowy said between bites of kibble. Why she likes you, I have no idea. You're pushing it, Snowworm. Gavin looked in the refrigerator for something to eat. You're right. Dr. Doolittle must have dialed in my frequency to snow cones. Amelia had skills talking to Snowy. And surprisingly, she wasn't half bad with people either. He liked talking to her. Gavin straightened. He liked talking to her. And she could talk to animals. She'd straighten him out. She'd reassure him it was all in his head. You need to commit, Gavin, Lacey was saying as briskly as she was whisking the contents of her bowl. Her words hit Gavin in the solar plexus. Excuse me? Either get some food or close the fridge. Lacey bumped the refrigerator door with her hip. Snowflake made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. Gavin grabbed containers with leftovers from Christmas dinner. He loaded a plate with turkey, mashed potatoes, and gravy. A microwave lifetime later, his food was hot. Voila! Dinner is the new breakfast of champions. He probably wouldn't eat again until dinner anyway. Snowflake came to sit next to him with the stare of a beggar. Not a chance, Snowboot. That's what I get for trying to be quiet? Snowflake sighed and made that deep rumbly noise. Not even a cookie? Okay, just one. Gavin handed him one and put a second on his plate. Hey. Snowy licked his chops. Mine. I deserve a cookie, Gavin told the dog. I'm the one who'll be out in the snow all day, not you. And not his two business partners. See what Amelia had started. He'd been happy yesterday. Happy, but stressed. Snowflake sank down until he lay half under the table. Charlotte entered the kitchen, notebook in hand. She brushed a strand of red hair behind her freckled ear. Mrs. Bowman wants all her outdoor decorations taken down before New Year's Eve. She looked at Gavin, not Lacey. The contract says we have until the 15th of January, Gavin said, trying to enjoy his creamy potatoes. Trying not to think about talking dogs or dog-talking veterinarians. She wants something put in its place. Charlotte's voice rang with the superiority of knowing something he didn't. Gavin heaved a sigh and set down his fork. Just tell me already. A light show in her kids' room. Permanent display kind of thing. We'd update the program every month so he won't get bored. Gavin was bored. He was bored of Christmas lights and clients who had no soul. And by bored, he meant annoyed. End of his rope, sanity hanging by a thread, ready to snap annoyed. There was a growl in the kitchen. Gavin looked down. It hadn't come from Snowy. Did you just growl at me? Charlotte asked, sitting back in her chair. No, Gavin picked up his fork. Stuffing his face was preferable to growling at his friend. Who's the drama king now? Snowy pawed his ankle. Charlotte poked Gavin's arm. Hey, this gig is a monthly fee. That's a good thing. Gavin bit down on sarcasm, wishing he could turn back the clock and uninvite Amelia to his house. I'll figure something out, but I'll need to get in the kids' room. Why don't I give you her number and you can schedule a visit? Charlotte didn't wait for his approval. She scribbled digits on a notepad, tore it off and left it on the table next to Gavin. The Reeds want a quote for New Year's Eve decorations. Can we rig a ball that drops at midnight? No, his sharp tone jabbed at Charlotte. Her shoulders pinched back and she gave him a hard look. Can we rig one? No. Work with me here, Gavin, Charlotte said. Maybe a pole and a basketball with lights on it? No. Charlotte tapped her pen on her pad. What is with you today? He thinks he's coming down with a fever. Lacey poured her batter into a cake pan. Sorry, Charlotte. You'll have to look online or make something yourself. Maybe you should try being quiet when you're cranky. Snowy pawed Gavin's ankle again. Charlotte set her pad on the table, then her pen, then her hands. All in precise order, like her controlled voice, tempered tone, and modulated words. This is out of my level of expertise. Online costs money. Rush delivery costs money. And you, my friend, are free. Technically, not. Speaking of money, when are we claiming our holiday bonuses? Lacey and I were talking about that yesterday while you were chasing Snowflake through the woods. We feel as if we should save the extra money for a rainy day. You know, the slow days we're going to have from February to October?
Yeah.
Well, about that, now was the perfect time for him to break the news that he was thinking of moving on. If only his stomach didn't roll and pitch like he'd flipped over on a black diamond run. He'd promised them he was in. Demanding a buyout was going to sap their resources. What was he doing? Snowflake sat up and stuck his nose in Gavin's face. Don't go. Really, dog? Gavin wiped drool off his sweatshirt. Really? Chapter 7. There's that Tyler kid. I hope he's feeling better today. Gavin wasn't talking to the St. Bernard in his passenger seat. He always talked to himself when he drove alone. Snowy sat up like a bird dog on point. A kid? Where? I'm talking to myself and a dog, and there's only one person on the road ahead of me, only one person that could be Tyler. I'm definitely going crazy. He signaled for the turn into Lawson's veterinary clinic. Let's hope Dr. Scrooge is in. And that she'd minored in psychology. Don't drop me off yet. Gavin hated that his thoughts sounded like dog thoughts. It wasn't even his voice he heard. Please. Gavin was torn. If he dropped the dog off and other things began talking to him, like his truck or a tree, then he'd have to check himself into a hospital. Sane was the crazy he knew. Meaning sane was a talking dog. But still. Please. Snowy laid his big head on Gavin's shoulder with only a small amount of drool. Gavin turned off his blinker and followed Tyler's Jeep to the ski resort. While the teen parked in the lot, Gavin drove his truck up the service road to the snow castle. It glistened in the weak morning light. He opened the car door and Snowflake jumped over him in a close-quarters flurry of fur and bone. By the time Gavin got out of the truck, the Saint Bernard was galloping down the hill toward the approaching teen. Snowy leaped around the boy, sniffing as if Tyler had been dunked in dog biscuit batter. Hey. Winded, Tyler stopped near Gavin, not looking much better than he had the day before, sallow complexion, hunched shoulders, frail frame. Hey, fella. Are you here to help, too? Snowy trotted back to Gavin and looked at him with soulful eyes. He's sick. Not only was Gavin hearing voices, the voices were not that of a rocket scientist. No sicker than yesterday, I see. Gavin lowered his tailgate and reached beneath the truck bed cover for the plastic tubs. Send him home then. The dog? Tyler asked. I thought he was yours. He's got the dying sickness. Snowflake let out a low howl. Gavin stopped dragging plastic tubs toward the tailgate and looked at Tyler, really focusing on his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the thin-lipped determination. The sun passed behind the first of many clouds making their approach. Gavin hadn't noticed when Randall first began looking sick. He was a rock star on the verge of being huge. There were after-parties and hangovers. Little sleep and long days. They all looked like hell. And then Randall had collapsed after a show in Phoenix. Stage 4 cancer, the doctor had said. 4 months to live, the doctor had said. They'd gone home, Randall to the bedroom he'd occupied as a teen, the one whose window faced Gavin's. They'd gone home to get well cards and phone calls from friends and social media tributes. They'd gone home, where surrounded by friends and family, Randall had pressed a data stick into Gavin's hand and said, "Remember me." 4 weeks later, he was gone. It had taken Gavin a week to find the courage to open the file on his computer. Randall had written him a song called Where I Get My Strength. The recording was rough. A simple guitar and Randall's weak, gravelly voice. The song was set to a slideshow of pictures of the two boys growing up. 2 lines from the chorus kept getting stuck in Gavin's head. You gave me strength just standing by my side. That strength meant more to me than fame's crazy ride. Gavin didn't want to be near Tyler. He didn't want to watch another person he cared for be eaten alive by cancer. What was happening to him? He was caring about people he barely knew. Are you crying? Snowy circled him. Gavin didn't want to be near a talking dog either. Hey, Tyler. Can you give Snow Buggy a ride to the vet's office down the road? Dr. Lawson is dog sitting today. Sure. Tyler whistled and walked back down the hill. Come on, boy. You worry me. Snowy didn't follow the boy. Gavin tossed the shovels out of the truck onto the fresh snow. Do me a favor and don't worry about me. Okay, I won't. Tyler turned and gave Gavin the kind of grin that said he thought his boss was nuts. How fitting. Because he was. Amelia knew the moment Snowflake entered the clinic. Paws scrambled on linoleum. A dog's deep voice rumbled as if to say, "Where is she?" Amelia had Ho-Ho on the exam table in room 2, checking her bandage. The big coon cat was purring fast and low, the way cats did when they were stressed but thankful of a tender human's touch. How many times must I tell you to keep your paws on the floor, young man? Frances sounded happier than she had in a long time, most likely due to the business they were getting from so many veterinary clinics in town being closed after the holiday. Plus there was a rumor that Amelia talking to Calvin when she'd given him a tennis ball was a social media hit. Paws landed with a clack on the linoleum and then loud snuffling began, ending on the other side of the door. He should have been a hunting dog. Frances opened the door. Her scrubs today were navy with Grinches riding a toy-filled sleigh. You can go in. Expecting Gavin, Amelia drew a deep breath. She'd stayed up late last night making more of Snowflake's biscuits, trying to find her adult self. The one that wasn't susceptible to quick crushes anytime a guy was nice to her. She'd given herself a stern lecture. She'd listened to some rap. All in the name of purging romanticism from her consciousness. Frances stepped out of the way. Amelia raised her head to smile and greeted, a teenage boy. I'm Tyler. He waved one hand awkwardly, as if he didn't wave at people much. He had on a black Christmastown high school hoodie beneath a thick jacket. I'm helping Gavin up at the resort. He sent me. Of course, he did. Gavin probably wanted to avoid her. Snowflake trotted around the table and greeted Amelia with a doggy pass of his body against her leg, including his slobbery jowls. And then he trotted back to Tyler. He emitted a grumbly growl and exhibited herding behavior, edging Tyler closer to the table. That dog. Frances chuckled. I think Snowflake wants you to say hello to Ho-Ho. Amelia stroked the big cat's fur, being careful to avoid touching her injured leg. The front door opened, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps. I'm coming, Frances called, closing the door to the exam room. That is one huge cat, Tyler said, awestruck. Ho-Ho stopped purring and sniffed the air in Tyler's direction. And then she did the most surprising thing. She inched her way closer to the teen, dragging herself with her front paws. Tyler proved his worth by scratching Ho-Ho behind her ears. What's wrong with him? Ho-Ho meowed. And then she purred louder. Ho-Ho is a she, Amelia said kindly. She's a Maine Coon and she has a broken leg. Snowflake laid his broad head on the table and huffed, looking from the teen to the cat. And then he turned watchful eyes on Amelia. Amelia laughed. Snowflake thinks you should adopt Ho-Ho. Snowflake panted his approval. I don't know. My mom doesn't like pets. There's shedding. And stains. And furniture destruction. Snowflake lifted his head with accusing eyes. He might have been more convincing of the innocence of animals if he hadn't been drooling on the table. At least think about it, Amelia said. She has a hairline fracture, but she should be able to go home in less than a week and she'll be as good as new. Frances opened the door. Dr. S.C., she caught herself when her gaze landed on Tyler. Dr. Lawson, you have a patient in room 1. Be there in a sec. Amelia noted the tender way Tyler was petting the cat and couldn't resist trying to find the cat a home. There's a chair back in the infirmary where we sit and hold the animals. Why don't you take her back there? Her cage is top corner right hand side when you're done. And then she left him. Snowflake followed Amelia into the next room. Room 1 was filled with familiar faces, Charlotte and her boyfriend's little boy Wesley, who sat in a chair and hugged a hamster cage. We think there's something wrong with Wesley's hamster. She's walking funny and she has a wet tail. Amelia's heart sank. A wet tail wasn't a good sign for a hamster. Her name is Penny, Wesley said with wide eyes. Let's get her on the table for an exam. Amelia lifted the cage gingerly from Wesley's arms. Well, hello, little girl. Amelia reached in the cage. The small hamster was shaking and did indeed have a wet rear end. Oh, you aren't feeling good, are you? Is she gonna die? Wesley asked, young voice cracking with emotion. Addison said she was gonna die. Like Mom. Charlotte made a choking noise. The hamster was panting as if in distress, and when Amelia ran her finger against the grain of the fur, her fur stood on end instead of laying back flat. Wesley, your little girl is very sick. Have you ever gotten the stomach flu and thrown up or had diarrhea? Wesley nodded, lips puckering as if holding back tears. That's what Penny has, only the smaller you are when you get a tummy infection, the harder it is to bounce back from it. Charlotte had her hand over her throat. Wesley rubbed at his nose, staring at his hamster. Is she gonna? Hold Penny for me. Amelia handed Wesley her patient. And then she began emptying the cage of food and water bowls. We're going to disinfect her cage, kind of like giving you a clean bed. I want you to clean her cage every few hours as long as she has a wet bottom. I'm going to give her a dose of antibiotic. And I'm going to send you home with more. You'll also get a small syringe that you'll use to make sure she gets enough water. For the next few days, I only want her to eat plain organic yogurt and drink something like Pedialyte or Gatorade. She needs her electrolytes. Amelia carried the cage out the rear exam room door to the infirmary, where she removed the bottom and dumped the shavings in the trash. Tyler watched her from a chair in the back where Ho-Ho filled his lap with play-love. I never knew of a vet who treated hamsters. Charlotte had followed her out of the exam room. I treated a lot of unusual pets when I used to practice in Miami. Amelia set the cage down on the counter. And then she sprayed the cage with disinfectant, filling the air with the nose-burning tang of germ killing. I'm glad we met you. Charlotte closed the door to the exam room and lowered her voice. I just bought him that hamster yesterday. Should I take her back? Before she dies and breaks that kid's heart? No, Amelia straightened, angry and horrified. Don't abandon the little thing just because she's sick. Animals have pulled through worse. Granted, Wettail had a very high kill rate, but still, her gaze met Tyler's. He looked horrified as well. If she looked healthy yesterday, we have a good chance. If she's strong-willed and is given lots of love, her chances increase even more. Amelia wiped down the cage with paper towels. None of us on this earth are disposable. Snowflake made a grumbly sound that Amelia translated to, Amen. After Charlotte and Wesley were sent on their way, Amelia cleaned both exam rooms and then wandered out to the lobby. Tyler and Francis were eating the cookies she'd left at the counter for Gavin. Snowflake sat at Tyler's feet, drooling. Amelia took a cookie and handed it to the dog. Francis gasped. Since when do we give animals cookies? When I said those cookies were for Gavin, I meant those are Snowflake's dog biscuits. Amelia tried hard not to laugh, but didn't succeed. I made more because Gavin ate a lot of the last batch. Tyler gagged, grabbed a tissue and spit out his cookie. Don't be a baby, Tyler. Francis rubbed Snowflake's chin, taking the sting from her words. You already ate too. Snowflake licked his chops. Amelia handed him another one. Tyler, aren't you supposed to be working for Gavin? The teen blew out a breath. I don't think I'm much help. Nonsense, Francis said. A strapping boy like you? I bet you're a big help. Tyler attempted to smile, and then cleared his throat and his expression. Hey, I was wondering if you could use an assistant a few days a week. You'd clean out cages and pick up. Do. Francis got right down to it. When Tyler nodded, she asked, why? Because I don't think any animal or person is disposable. Color bloomed high on his cheeks. A sense of belonging wrapped itself around Amelia. These two people understood her love of animals. She couldn't resist. She hugged the teen. Well, if Gavin doesn't need you, we sure do. Snowflake showed Tyler love by wiping his drippy muzzle on the boy's pants. Well, Francis said in a businesslike manner. You've got the right attitude and more gumption than most of my grandchildren. Thanks. Tyler cradled Snowflake's face in his hands and stared into his eyes. It's like he's trying to talk to me. Dr. SCR, Francis cleared her throat. Amelia always says animals speak just as clearly as people. Amelia wasn't sure she'd ever said that, but she agreed with the sentiment. There's just one problem with hiring you, Tyler. Until we get more customers, I can't pay you. Heck, she barely made enough to keep the lights on and food in her fridge. Francis gets a free room in exchange for running the place. Francis had been the vet tech for the last veterinarian to practice here. When business had dropped off after that first holiday, Amelia had been forced to cut back hours and lay off staff. At the same time, Francis' husband had died and one morning Amelia had found her sleeping in the quiet room chair. I can't go home. He died in our bed. 2 sentences. 2 eyes filled with tears. They'd converted an extra office and the break room into an apartment. In addition to a bathroom for human customers, the office had a full bathroom with shower and back, and that became Francis too. It was one of the reasons they were able to offer 24/7 emergency services. I know one way you can pay me. Tyler grinned. Give me a cool name like Dr. Scrooge or Nurse Grinch. Dude, it's been, like, forever. Randall's brother Hollings finally returned Gavin's SOS call for a generator. Forever. In fact, it hadn't been forever. The last time they'd seen each other had been Randall's funeral. But Gavin ignored the detail since only one other former friend in the business had called him back, and he hadn't had any generators to spare. Are you on the road? I'm with Full Smash. They're totally rad. Hollings sounded happy, which made Gavin jealous. Edgar and Paul make this band go. Edgar and Paul had been the Randall House Band's bass player and drummer, respectively. We've got gigs scheduled this week in Boston, Hollings was saying. And next week in New York. And then it's on to the Florida coast. Boston. Gavin couldn't believe his luck. Tell me you've got the generator. The one the Randall House Band had traveled with for years. Dudeness. Hollings sounded offended. I never go anywhere without the generator. I would owe you one big solid favor, Hollings, if you'd bring it out to Christmas Town tomorrow. I'm setting up a light show for New Year's Eve and the juice is limited. Oh. All of a sudden, Hollings sounded like a man of his age, 32. Let me clear it with the band's manager. Anger stabbed at Gavin like it had in the old days, when he'd had to deal with Hollings. Randall's older brother was a mooch and a slacker, and often a liar. Of course, a future favor wouldn't be good enough. Hollings would want something. Gavin took Snowy's breakfast advice. He rubbed his chest and kept silent. Otherwise, he'd snipe that he'd helped pay for that generator and he'd kept it working for years on the road when they played at outdoor venues and bars with subpar electrical. Instead, Gavin waited until he'd calmed to say, that'd be great. Let me know what he says. Do you ever think about, Hollings hesitated. Please don't talk about Randall. Going back on the road? Hollings asked. Yeah. Gavin blurted too quickly, incredibly relieved on too many levels to count. I have been a lot lately. Let me see what our needs are, Hollings said, still the unexpected adult. Maybe he'd changed. Maybe that's what losing Randall had done to him. It'd be nice if something good came of Randall's passing. His parents would be happy. Grant thanked Hollings as his teenage crew arrived, including Tyler, who'd been gone over an hour. Tyler picked up a shovel. You want me to load snow in tubs? One of the teenage boys sniggered. I can do it. Tyler thrust out his chin. Everyone knows you can. Gavin headed off a showdown Tyler wasn't going to win. How good are you with electronics? Everyone always asks me for advice on how to do things on their computers and phones. Gavin had suspected as much. Come with me. Tyler followed him to a locked shed behind the lodge. I can shovel. You don't have to baby me. Yeah, I do. Growing up, I had an older brother who was better than I was at everything. Math, sports, girls. I took boxing lessons because my dad was convinced it'd help me get more coordinated. Gavin pointed at his nose. All it got me was a broken nose. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can, but I'm trying to level the playing field. Because while my brother got better at sports, I got better at electronics. Gavin unlocked the shed. He picked up a crate of lights designed to be buried in snow and handed them to Tyler. These lights go inside the walls on the second level of the castle. You're going to install them. Tyler looked at him the way Snowy looked at him when he fed him a gingerbread cookie with hero worship. For the first time that day, Gavin felt staying in Christmas Town was worth it. But the feeling didn't last. Chapter 8. Nurse Grinch stood in the middle of the infirmary, petrified, almost mid-stride. Busy day. Amelia stepped around Francis. A cat with an infected abscess huddled in the corner of her cage, mewing softly. "You'll be okay, sweetheart," Amelia said as she passed. An old Labrador with a growth on his chest sat panting at the door to his cage. His owners were going away for a few days and wanted the growth checked for cancer. "You show them how a man approaches a needle, whiskey." Amelia paused to let the lab lick her fingers. Ho-Ho was curled in the cat bed on the floor of the quiet space. She gave a throaty meow when she saw Amelia approach. "Best patient on the planet." Amelia stroked her thick fur. Snowflake lay on the floor next to the cat. He grumbled softly. "Best four-legged assistant on the planet." Amelia rubbed the ruff beneath Snowflake's neck. "You can hear them." Only Francis' eyes moved. "You can really hear them." "Same as always." Amelia opened the antibiotic cabinet and began taking inventory. "I didn't think it would be like this." Francis still hadn't moved. "Like what?" "The knowing. The hearing. I mean, it's so clear what they want and how they feel." Francis shook her head and took a step. "At first, I walked in here and thought Tyler had dusted my gingerbread doggy treat with drugs. But then you came in and it was like my receiver had been tuned." Ho-Ho meowed, and then meowed again. Noah Francis pointed at the Maine Coon. "You knew I wasn't crazy all along, didn't you?" Francis was so excited about understanding animals, Amelia didn't have the heart to tell her they didn't really talk. "Oh, boy." The lights from Gavin's truck signaled he'd arrived to pick up Snowflake. Nerves she'd kept leashed all day rampaged in her belly and sucked her skin tight against her bones. "Don't let me make a total fool of myself, Snowflake." The Saint Bernard huffed. "Yeah, it's hard to stop a fool, isn't it?" She smoothed the hem of her t-shirt and drew a deep, nerve-controlling breath. It was dark outside, which made it hard to see Gavin approach. But she heard his footfalls on the deck. Each step jangled her hold on her frazzled nerves. What would he say? She'd stomped off last night as if he'd broken a wedding vow. "Be cool. You did nothing but get overly dramatic." And look like she'd translated less than a day's worth of talk into a promise for a future. Guys who hang with bands. She was grasping at straws now. Her hands tangled in the hem of her t-shirt. If she was lucky, this would be the last day of dog-sitting Gavin would need. The door knob turned. Snowflake greeted Gavin by trying to tackle him. "No, you can't lick my face, Snowplow." Gavin blocked his blow with an armbar. "I don't like kisses." Snowflake turned and padded to the hearth with a grumble that sounded like, "Don't believe him." Gavin's gaze cut to Amelia and, was he blushing? "Don't let Snowflake embarrass you." She wasn't sure why she said it. Maybe because Francis had discovered pet language today. And Addison and Wesley had demonstrated a mastery of it last night. "That dog," he huffed and walked to the counter opposite her. "It's not that I don't like kisses." Gavin's gaze fell to her lips and the color in his cheeks deepened. Amelia untangled her fingers from her t-shirt and laughed. He was nervous, too. "I'm sorry I made Tyler late for work. He fell in love with the animals." She picked up the dish towel. "That's not quite right. He fell in love with the idea that you shouldn't give up on sick animals. He's a good kid." The sadness in Gavin's voice was palpable. He opened the latest Christmas tin she'd filled with Snowflake's gingerbread cookies as if needing a distraction. Snowflake growled, raising his eyes to stare Gavin down. Amelia chuckled. "Snowflake is protective of his cookies." "You think?" Gavin put the lid back on. "He's going to body slam me in my sleep if I eat another one." "That sounds extreme." Amelia pretended to be busy by opening the silverware drawer. Yep, it still had silverware. The nerves threatened to do the whole skin-tightening thing. She took a deep breath and closed the drawer. Over by the fire, Snowflake made a rumbling noise low in his throat. For once, Amelia wasn't sure what the dog was trying to say. Gavin glanced from her to Snowflake and back again. "I must be crazy," he muttered. "Okay, I'll bite." "Why is it so important that you don't give up on an animal?" Such a casual question. I'm a vet. Such a casual answer. It felt like a lie. Snowflake glowered at her this time. We call bull. Gavin grinned. My dad was a vet. Caring for animals is in my genes. She crumpled the dish towel into a ball. Your dad was. Gavin sat on a bar stool across from her. Sat and met her gaze the way a man who is more than a friend meets the gaze of a woman. Amelia's lips felt like they'd been numbed and prepped for oral surgery. Somehow, she managed to speak intelligently. Shortly after I graduated, my dad died in a car accident. That was nearly 4 years ago. He left me his practice in Miami. Snowflake got to his feet with a groan and lapped the living room, stopping to look at the pictures she had on a high narrow table against a wall. Is this your family? Gavin had followed the dog. He picked up a framed photo of Amelia and her father, arms wrapped around each other on her graduation from vet school. Amelia ventured outside the safety of the kitchen with her too tight skin and numb lips. The one you're holding is of me and my dad. This one is my mom and sister. The two women had linked arms outside a skating rink in Miami. There were no happy pictures of the four of them. None had been taken since she and her sister were very young. Is your mom wearing a Christmas sweater with shorts in Florida? Gavin lifted the picture to stare at it more closely. Yep. And that was taken in the summer. She took the picture from him. Their fingers touched. The numbness receded. Maybe July. There's an American flag on that parking meter. Snowflake stood on the other side of Gavin, doing the panting doggy grin. Gavin grinned, too. I think it's safe to agree that your mom loves Christmas. She does. The skin-tightening, numb-lipped feeling was back. Probably more than she caught herself. Snowflake groaned the equivalent of a doggy. Say what? He moved between them and leaned against Amelia's leg, but he was looking at Gavin and making those complex grumbly-growly noises that she couldn't interpret. I'm supposed to ask, Gavin rubbed his forehead. I mean, I want to ask if your mother has anything to do with you being Dr. Scrooge. Amelia took a rubbery step back toward the safety of the kitchen. And then another. My mom and I are separated. Gavin captured her gaze and took a step toward her. Isn't separated a term reserved for divorces? He held a hand over Snowflake's face when the dog started to grumble. I've got this. I use it to wrap my head around the fact that my mom and my sister don't talk to me. Amelia needed to take another step back. Her feet seemed bolted to the ground. I hope that we don't have irreconcilable differences. I hope that we can eventually work things out and be a family again. Snowflake made noise, but his vocalizations were no louder than the alarm bells ringing in Amelia's ears. She'd said too much. Her father had had no patience with complainers. Amelia locked her knees, tipped her chin higher, and dipped her voice in gritty resolve. I don't want your pity. She dropped the dish towel on the counter. Gavin had been looking at Snowflake. He lifted his gaze to Amelia's. It didn't pity or mock. It wasn't charming or superior. It understood. Tell me. And when she didn't immediately speak, he reached out and stroked a finger down her cheek, as if wiping away her pain. Tell me. Tell him what? The only things left were her insecurities. Her differences. Her feeling that she wasn't her mother's daughter. She tangled her fingers in her t-shirt hem and let her gaze roam the cabin. And let the truth tumble free. I was never interested in the things Mom and Cicely were. Clothes, Christmas, competitive ice skating. Snowflake pressed his nose against her hand. She gazed down at his patient, gentle eyes and then glanced up at Gavin and found the same patient, gentle gaze. Safe. Her secrets were safe with these two. Cicely started skating when she was 6 years old. Mom had Olympic dreams. The photo at the skating rink taunted her and cut a spiteful figure 8 across her heart. I probably wasn't the most supportive sister. And somewhere along the line they stopped including me in things. Snowflake grumbled. Gavin nodded and said with a voice as soft as Italian shoe leather, they disposed of you? Yes, no, Does it sound pathetic if I say yes? There was a 7-year age difference between Amelia and her younger sister. Had she wanted another child because she'd decided Amelia was unlovable? She found her sea legs and took a few more steps back, bumping into the kitchen counter because yes, her cabin was that small and she was feeling small, too. Small for confessing her petty grievances, because it wasn't like her childhood had been horrible. It shouldn't matter that my mother doesn't love me as much as my sister. I didn't starve as a child. I wasn't beaten. But a child needs all the love a mother can give. She closed her eyes, because life wasn't fair, but you picked yourself up and moved on no matter how hard it hurt. Her father had told her that when she hadn't passed her board exams the first time. Oh, what does it matter if I was my mother's favorite or not? I always felt closer to Dad anyway. Had he seen that she lived in Cicely's shadow? Had that been why he'd taken her under his wing? I've helped at his practice since I was a kid. He taught me how to be a vet. He taught me how to listen to animals. We volunteered at animal shelters together. We worked shot clinics. He hired me after vet school. And he'd been proud of her. Incredibly proud. And she'd been good with that. Not numb. Or unnoticed. Or less loved. And then he died. Gavin had found his way to her side. She nodded slowly, as if restraint would contain her tears. Thinking about Dad still brought tears to her eyes. And then he died and the trouble started. Without knowing how, her hand was nestled in Gavin's. Dad left me his practice, probably as a way to make up for the way Mom treated me. I don't know. She'd never know. And Mom, he took care of her, too. Mom got the house. She sighed, staring at their joined hands and wondering how lives and families got so messed up. It was Cicely who got nothing. And Mom was convinced that I should split the value of the practice 3 ways. The stress in her voice must have struck a nerve with Snowflake. He sat near her feet, staring up at her face with concern. But, your dad didn't leave the practice to them. Gavin boiled down the gist of the problem into one sentence. No. He'd established the practice long before he met my mom, so it was his to give. It was never in Mom's name and never came under the laws of community property. Gavin scrutinized her face. I sense another but in there. But, they wouldn't let up. They'd show up at the office and argue. They didn't care that I had patience and that their drama cost me some. They just wanted money because ice skating is an expensive sport. And they refused to acknowledge that at 20 Cicely was over the hill. So I made a real estate trade. To a place that's a constant reminder of your mother. His thumb stroked over hers. Amelia took a moment to catch her breath and not think about his touch. It's a reminder, yes. But after that first holiday, no one has forced decorations or clothing on me like my mother used to do. Whoever gave me those decorations was probably being kind, assuming I couldn't afford to do it myself. Snowflake grumbled and wiped his muzzle on her leg. Gavin waved a hand over his face again, as if he was understanding whatever the dog was grumbling about. But you're still feeling guilty, Gavin said finally. About what your dad left you. She nodded. Because the only way I can be a part of the family again is to buy my way back in. That sounded sad and pathetic. But the situation was sad and pathetic. And I haven't made this practice thrive. She probably could have. She'd been hiding behind Dr. Scrooge. They made me feel as if I'd gone behind their backs and coerced Dad. Mom was left $1 million house, a retirement account, and a hefty life insurance policy. If she spends wisely, she won't ever have to work. Snowflake wasn't letting that comment go by. It felt like he was part of the conversation. When Randall died, Gavin spoke as if the words were being reluctantly drawn out of him. He left his parents the right to his publishing catalog, all except one song. A new song. An unrecorded song. Randall didn't leave that song to his older brother Hollings, who is something of a caution. He left it to you, Amelia guessed. And Hollings was livid. Gavin's voice wound down like a spinning top running out of spins. I'd give the rights to the song to Hollings if it would get me Randall back. As it is, I have no plans to allow anyone to record it. That song, it's the only thing I have left of my best friend. Other than your memories. Amelia squeezed his hand, wanting to return some of the strength he'd lent her. He might have felt that you'd be the best shepherd for it. That you'd find the right person to bring it to the world. Or he might have meant for you to have the song because he wanted to give you a start in life, like my dad did for me. Gavin shook his head. I'm not selling that song. I'm making my own way here. Temporarily. She pinned him with her gaze. It would take you an hour to pack up and leave. I don't know how you saw it when I didn't see it myself, but I miss aspects of the life on the road. He spoke so low she almost couldn't hear him over the crackle of the fire. I miss the roar of the crowd, second encores, and standing ovations. You mean no one does that for your work here? She tried to tease a smile out of him and failed. She gave his hand a little shake. They might on New Year's Eve. What I do here is ordinary. Gavin pulled his hands back and dropped his gaze to the grumbling dog. I'm just another cog in the wheel that drives Christmas Town. My customers have asked me to change colored lights to twinkles, natural pine garland to snow frosted, add bells to tree branches and then cut those branches down because people can't see their house lights for the trees. He'd worked himself up to hand-sweeping anger. I take it you didn't get a standing O for any of your work, but is that why you did it in the first place? For the accolades? Shouldn't you love what you do because doing a good job is in itself rewarding? He was hunkered down in his shell, scowling, unappreciative of her teasing, not realizing that brevity was the only weapon a woman who was barely his friend had at her disposal. Maybe an ovation isn't what I want. His tone was as dark as his scowl. Maybe it's that there's no challenge for me in Christmas Town. There's no soul? Amelia guessed. My mom has Christmas decorations up all year round. When you see that every day, it tends to lose its meaning. You've been putting up Christmas decorations for weeks. That would take the fun out of the holiday. You sound like the thrill is gone and you need a vacation. The way you're talking, we're both Scrooge. If Gavin was Scrooge, he wouldn't be seeing magic in Amelia's eyes. If he was Scrooge, he wouldn't have wanted to kiss her. Come to the ski resort. Gavin reached for her hand and tugged her a step closer when what he wanted to do was fill his arms with her and soothe their doubts and unknowns and empty places. She looked to the French doors and darkness. Tomorrow? No. Right now. He needed her to see what he'd been doing at the ski resort. She's not going to give you a standing ovation. Snowy moved toward the fire. I don't expect a standing ovation, Gavin said, annoyed. The dog was a representation of his inner psyche. The dog had been feeding him questions to ask Amelia. It had been like Dr. Phil was whispering prompts in his ear. The dog shivered and curled tighter on the pink blanket. We can leave Snow Stop here. Gavin could win Amelia's heart without the dog. One less voice on the mountain. Snowy lifted his head and gave Gavin a stern stare. You're rushing this. It's not fair to her when you aren't sure you'll stay. Gavin was moving toward the door, and amazingly, Amelia was trailing behind him. I'm not listening to my head, he said. Which is saying slow down. And our chaperone, Snowdust, is wishing us a romantic evening under the stars. Liar. Snowy's head plopped on his big paws. Amelia's smile said she was on the same wavelength. My skills as a dog whisperer must be rubbing off on you. They bundled up and Gavin drove to the ski lodge. Neither said much. They'd probably said too much back at the cabin, exposing their soft underbellies and hoping it hadn't been a mistake. So what if it was too soon? So what if Gavin wasn't 100% invested in staying? They were lonely and there was chemistry between them. He held Amelia's hand from the parking lot to the place in front of the lodge and the ski lift where the snow castle had been built. Tomorrow they'd finish the stairs and slide, and the only thing left for him to worry about would be the generator. The snow was falling. The doors at the lodge were closed, holding in the heat and the noise of guests at the restaurant, lobby, and bar. Light spilling from lodge windows illuminated the tree-lined snow-sparkling slopes. They were alone. Gavin let her hand go. This is what I've been working on. Icy turrets rose into the darkness as majestic as the mountain behind it. Amelia went to stand at the arched entrance, patting the sturdy wall with the flat of her gloved hand. It looks pretty. Will there be a spotlight on it on New Year's Eve? You wound me. Stay right there. He hurried to the controls behind the castle and flipped a switch. Suddenly, it was lit from within its walls. He and Tyler had done a good job. The colors faded from yellow to green to blue to red and back to yellow. It's beautiful, Amelia said. She was beautiful. Gavin no longer looked at the colorful castle. He looked at her. At her joyous smile. He'd given her this moment. This reason to smile. Snowy, his inner voice, had been right. He wanted appreciation. So he showed her more. Now watch this. He held his phone out in front of her and toward the bunny slope. This is the light show. It'll project on the snow. The video was the perfect tribute to the season. Santa delivering toys. Santa seeking to relax on the ski resort slopes. Santa escorting Mrs. Claus in a sparkly gown to the resort's restaurant. Santa watching a light show as the ball dropped. And the requisite singing of Auld Lang Syne. He couldn't take credit for it. He'd purchased the rights to the video. He leaned closer to whisper in her ear. And then. Somehow, Gavin's arms were over Amelia's shoulders and she was leaning against his chest. She supposed she should be watching the images on his phone, but she wasn't. Her Florida roots were showing. She was cold toes, fingers, nose. Despite that, she turned, still in the circle of his arms. And then? And then Santa has a hot kiss. Gavin slid his phone in his pocket, gazed into her eyes, and didn't kiss her. If Snow Shovel was here, he'd be complaining about the cold. Amelia stepped back. A kiss. A kiss was too soon. Gavin realized it, too. She wanted a kiss anyway. No, Gavin drew her closer, back into the circle of his arms. He'd be telling me to kiss you. Gavin bent and pressed his mouth to hers. She forgot about cold toes and cold fingers and cold noses. Gavin was warm, his lips, his hands, his body. She could lose herself in his kiss in a blizzard. Her hands crept up and gripped the lapels of his jacket, willing herself to believe that this kiss meant he wasn't leaving her or boxes and bows or Christmas Town. Too soon, Gavin drew back, staring deeply into her eyes. And then he gave her a half grin. Snow Bucket is full of wonderful advice. One of Gavin's teenage crew brought his dog to work. I don't mean to be mean. Ash had climbed the walk to the snow castle. He nodded toward the husky. But I can't have yellow snow here this week. The dog sat panting at the teen's feet. He just finished racing around the castle and bounding in snowdrifts. He acted the way Gavin had felt after kissing Amelia. He acted without thinking about rules or consequences. Or in Gavin's case, without thinking about the itch to leave. For the moment, that itch was scratched. My parents drove my grandmother back to Boston, Sam said defensively, rubbing at the red acne on his chin. I can't leave Dakota at home alone. The last time he was alone, he ate the arms off our couch. I'm sorry, Ash said, clearly not about to bend. My guests come here for the white snow. Gavin was glad Ash hadn't seen Snowy here. But the fact remained that he couldn't afford to lose a strong body. They needed to finish the steps and the slide. And Hollings hadn't gotten back to him about the generator. One crisis at a time. He knelt by the dog, looking in his silver eyes. Dakota touched his nose to Gavin's chin with a soft whine. It's okay. Gavin set aside the fact that a dog other than Snowy was talking to him. He'd rather think, as Amelia put it, he was learning pet language. Regardless, the dog needed structure and supervision. What you need is a dog sitter, Dakota. Dog sitter? Ash perked up. Of course. Everyone wants to bring their dogs with them. If there was a way to offer them the opportunity to bring their pets, my bookings and lift ticket sales would go up. He surveyed the resort. But I don't have anywhere to put a kennel. Boarding. That would increase Amelia's business. Maybe enough that she'd reach out to that deadbeat mother of hers with a check. Maybe enough that Mommy Dearest would take the offering and Amelia would then feel good about celebrating the season. No more Dr. Scrooge. Gavin put a hand on Ash's shoulder and explained about Snowy. You need to talk to Dr. Lawson. Dr. Scrooge? Sam's eyebrows shot up. But. Gavin shot the teen with a death ray glare. Take your dog to Dr. Lawson and be nice to her or I'll hear about it. Dude. Hollings appeared next to Gavin later that afternoon. He wasn't dressed for snow. He wore tennis shoes, ripped skinny jeans, a full smash t-shirt, and a thin jacket he. Ha! Deant zipped. It's cold out here. Gavin hugged him. And not just the half-hug shoulder bump. It was the real thing, the kind of hug guys gave each other when they'd experienced loss together. They may have had their differences, but they shared a love of Randall. Good to see you, man. Gavin slapped Hollings back before releasing him. Likewise. Hollings thrust his hands in his pockets, inquisitive gaze taking note of things. He was so like Randall that Gavin's chest ached. Same eyes, same hair, same curiosity about his surroundings. This is God's country, man. Hollings grinned. God's country when the heater broke. The spell was broken. Randall had been deep. He'd look at a landscape and see the trees, and then a metaphor in the trees, one that would make you think about the meaning of life. Hollings was about as deep as a kiddie pool. Still, the compelling yearning for family remained. The throat-aching loss of friendship. The emptiness that looking at Randall's old texts created when Gavin realized there would never be new ones. Seeing you, it brings it all back, you know? Hollings shook his head, smile evaporating until he looked more his age and less like a man stuck in his youth. Sometimes when I'm setting up the guitars on stage, I stop and panic because Randall's isn't there. I know, I still hear his voice sometimes, as if he's standing beside me. Hollings nodded. I heard why on the way down here. Do you remember how you'd get the crowd going with lights and words flashing on the screen above the stage? Hollings raised his voice but pitched it to Randall's deep octave. Why are we here? Gavin thrust his fist in the air. To rock. The teenage work crew stopped what they were doing to stare at the two of them like they were crazy. Tyler wiped the sweat from his face. His look lacked a teenage sneer. You were awesome, Hollings said. And hey, I checked with the band manager. Our tech just quit. We could use someone like you. Gavin almost gave a mighty, heck. Yeah. One thing stopped him, Amelia. He'd been standing here when he'd kissed her. Talking to her had made him feel like the work in Christmastown could be enough. The niggle of doubt at the back of his neck contradicted the feeling. I'll think about it, he promised Hollings. I had the most amazing thing happen today, Amelia said when she let Gavin in that night, greeting him with a quick kiss on the cheek, before quickly spinning back toward the kitchen. It was disgusting. Snowy didn't get up from his place in front of the fire. There was an emergency. I'd treated a Labrador earlier this week after he swallowed socks. She rolled her hand as she ambled toward the kitchen. That's another story. The thing is, his owner brought him back in today suspecting he had an infection because Calvin clearly wasn't himself. But during the exam, I felt a blockage in his intestines. So I sedate him and open him up. Gavin put a hand to his stomach. Giving blood made him queasy. Snowy stared at him sympathetically. It gets worse. Just one incision and out pops his intestines looking like a python had swallowed a goat. Amelia spun in the kitchen like Julie Andrews in the opening scene from The Sound of Music. Do you know how rare that is? Gavin's hand moved to his mouth. I'll never be able to unsee that. Snowy belched. I just threw up in my mouth. Do you want to know what that was? Amelia spread her arms and leaned on the countertop. Her eyes sparkled above a wide grin. Mutely, Gavin shook his head. She ignored him. She probably didn't even see him, lost as she was in the joy of surgery. A 6-inch stuffed polar bear. Calvin swallowed it whole. She sliced open a pineapple on a cutting board, shaking her head. Lobs. Snowflake turned his back to Amelia, mumbling something about stupid breeds of dog. I stitched Calvin up, and when he came to, he didn't whine or whimper. He looked at me and wagged his tail. It was the best thank you ever. She pointed her knife at Gavin, still gushing. Better than a standing ovation. Gavin wanted to disagree. And then his owner came by and they had this most amazing moment where Calvin seemed to be saying how much he loved him. You heard him? Gavin's gaze cut to Snowflake. I didn't have to hear him. It was there in his big brown eyes. It was a reminder that what I do makes a difference, not just in the lives of pets, but in people. She looked up, astonished. His owner hugged me. Unbidden, a growl rose in Gavin's throat. An unhappy growl. A possessive growl. Gavin opened the Christmas tin and bit into a gingerbread cookie. Do you want to stay for dinner? Crock pot beef stew and biscuits, not Snowflake's biscuits. She registered what he was eating and frowned. Gavin embraced that frown, because suddenly the thought of being domesticated, waking up in the same town every day and being underappreciated, was more than he could bear. I should collect Snowy and get going. Oh. The openness she'd shown him shuddered. Of course. I just assumed. Don't go. Snowy stood, reading Gavin's mind because his ability to speak was a figment of Gavin's imagination. You need her. I don't. Gavin snapped. He needed his mojo back. He needed concerts and chaos, and a circle of friends who shared the same experiences, who lived for something beautiful and pure, music. That was the reason Randall had become a singer. The snow castle is finished and the New Year's Eve light show is set. Did I do something wrong? Amelia asked in a small voice. No, he didn't want to hurt her. He just wanted a clean break. So why did he close the distance between them and rest his hands on her shoulders? I've decided to leave. I'm going back on the road. Juvenile. Snowflake huffed. Why? She stared up at him, brows bent in confusion. To rock, he said simply. Snowflake walked to the door without saying a word. I thought you didn't play an instrument. I don't. I work the electronics. I'm going to join a band on New Year's Day. So this, although it's been great, it doesn't give you the ego thrill you're looking for. She tore free of his grip. You're just like my sister. The skater? Accolades are a drug for her, but she'll never be more than a seasonal skater in Disney on Ice. She'll never be satisfied doing a job where she isn't in the spotlight. And neither will you. What does that say about how deep and soulful you are? Gavin glanced at Snowy for help. The dog was annoyingly mute. A burst of anger planted his feet on the floor. He didn't need advice from a dog. This town is driving me crazy. Amelia retreated to the corner of the kitchen and crossed her arms over her chest. I hear animals talk. Gavin jabbed his finger in Snowy's direction. Snowmobile is always giving me advice on how to cope and on what to say to you. Her brown eyes flashed. To me? Snowy pawed at the door. Yes. Ever since he came that wasn't right. It hadn't started until when I ate those cookies. I haven't been myself since. I have conversations with people on topics I don't even care about. Just this morning, he talked to a neighbor about the health of his trees because Snowy felt they were diseased. Amelia gave the Christmas tin a considering look and then her gaze returned to him. So you're saying it wasn't your idea to talk to me about my past? You weren't interested in learning more about me, but the dog was? Too late, Gavin realized he didn't look crazy. He looked like a jerk. Snowy pawed more urgently at the door. You're saying, Amelia went on. It wasn't your idea to take me to the mountain and kiss me? I wanted that kiss, he said firmly, although it felt as if he was sinking in quicksand. Only because it helped you pass the time in this town that drives you crazy. She marched past him toward the door. I was just another stop on the road. Is that it? She opened the door. Snowy didn't waste time retreating. Gavin moved at a slower pace. Things didn't go any easier when Gavin returned to the Victorian and told Lacey and Charlotte that he wanted them to buy him out. The next morning, Gavin was given the silent treatment by Charlotte, by Lacey, and by Snowy. The dog had even refused to go with him to work. So what? He looked forward to taking down the Bowman lights in silence. The mindless physical work was just what he needed to focus on his new life. Because he'd spent most of last night trying to edit the conversation he'd had with Amelia. Not that he was going to dwell on that today. No one talked to him as he disconnected the computer in the garage. Or when he wound up the light strands in the driveway. Mrs. Bowman was subdued when he knocked on the door. In early December, when he'd put up her lights, she talked at him nonstop, full of town gossip. But with each step she took as she led him upstairs, the floodgates reopened, drowning Gavin's silence. My son loved your light display. He watched it from his window as soon as it got dark. It's why I want something installed in his room. It's important that he has a joyous environment. We're going through a rough patch. You probably heard. My husband left us 2 days before Christmas. I hadn't heard. Spare him the details. He had everything ready to set up in the boys' room. All he needed were the dimensions and he could be done with this job today. Mrs. Bowman opened a door at the top of the stairs and let him go in first. It was a typical teenage boy's room. Plain blue bedspread. Posters of sports stars on the walls. A tub of balls, football, basketball, soccer. A TV and game system. Yearbooks. It could have been Randall's room pre-cancer if it had a guitar. Well, maybe not. There was a "Cancer Sucks" bumper sticker slapped on his dresser. My son used to play every sport. Mrs. Bowman's voice was strained. His stamina went first. And then his strength. And then the other boys started making fun of him. I wish I'd have taken him to the doctor sooner. The walls closed in on Gavin. A photo above it showed Mrs. Bowman hugging someone. Her son. Gavin moved closer. If he knew what kind of kid he was, he could tailor the lights to his interests. A face came into focus. Tyler? Now Gavin wanted the details. He struggled to fill his lungs with air. Your husband left recently? Yes. Mrs. Bowman was like a stale cookie. Her expression was stiff and hard, but she was ready to crumble. Bob couldn't face Tyler's cancer. The day after his diagnosis, Bob bought a sports car, quit his job and drove cross-country. Said he'd always wanted to do it. Crap time to have a midlife crisis. Gavin cracked his knuckles. He wanted to punch Bob. More than once. Tell me about it. Mrs. Bowman stared around the room with eyes that didn't seem to see anything. So I want something to distract Tyler when he goes through chemo. He wants to adopt a cat and I suppose I should let him. When does he begin treatments? Next week. Her lips and nose trembled. She was about to crumble. Your light show will distract him. And me. Unexpectedly, she threw her arms around Gavin. Those lights of yours were the only thing that made Tyler smile. Those lights gave me hope through the holiday. They gave me strength. A feeling blossomed in Gavin's chest. It was warm and bittersweet. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was something better. Amelia dropped the Christmas tin on the front counter at the clinic. Gavin said he ate these cookies and heard Snowflake speak. She barely got the words past her tight throat. Frances hooked her fingers in the neck of her red Grinch scrubs. It's been a few days since I had a cookie. I don't hear the animals today. Not like I did. When you and Tyler ate them. Amelia opened the tin. The sweet smell of gingerbread filled the air. I'm going to try this in the name of science. And broken hearts. She didn't want to think that Gavin had kissed her because of some hallucinogenic reaction to gingerbread. She'd much rather think that kind-hearted Snowflake, who was playing matchmaker between Tyler and Ho-Ho, had played matchmaker between Gavin and Amelia. Hollings answered Gavin's call on the first ring. "Hang on," he shouted. "I'm at rehearsal." The guitar riff in the background grew fainter, but no less familiar. That song. Gavin felt sick. Parked in front of the Bowman house, he bent over his steering wheel. He'd called because he wanted to tell Hollings he'd decided to stay. He hadn't realized his simple light displays packed such an emotional punch, giving people joy in ways he hadn't expected. "Can you hear me?" Hollings said. Gavin could hear. He'd heard too much. "Does Full Smash play Randall House Band songs?" "Didn't I tell you?" Full Smash is a Randall House Band cover group. That's all we play. We're in negotiations with my parentals to use the Randall House Band name. They said if I can get you. Gavin stopped listening. Or rather, he stopped listening to Hollings' ramble. "You gave me strength just standing by my side." The vocalist sounded nothing like Randall. "Dude." Hollings shouted. "Wrong key." Gavin had to swallow twice before he could speak. "They're playing Where I Get My Strength." His song. The song Randall had written for him. And then he was shouting, "You have no right." Randall. Gavin was letting Randall down. Or had Randall seen this coming? Did he want Gavin to help put the band back together? Gavin washed a hand over his face. He didn't know. He didn't. "Hey." Hollings sounded like he wanted to get up in Gavin's face. "They can play any song they like as long as they don't record it." "You stole my song." Gavin gripped the steering wheel. It was cold. He was burning up inside, increasingly convinced that Randall wouldn't have wanted this cheap imitation. "I helped Randall put that video together," Hollings was saying. "You think I wouldn't make a copy? You gave me strength just standing by my side. That strength meant more to me than fame's crazy ride." Gavin needed strength now. Strength not to drive to Boston and punch Hollings. Strength to find a good lawyer and make sure no one played his song without his permission. New Year's Eve had arrived. It was supposed to be a time of new beginnings. And it was, although not the type of beginning Amelia's heart wanted. Bookings were coming in to board pets for skiers. The social media post of Amelia talking to Calvin had gone viral. Their appointment slots were filling up at the clinic. Soon, she'd have to contact Mom. It'd be messy and no check would ever be big enough, but she'd have to try. It was small consolation that she'd have enough money to hire Tyler and pay Francis a stipend. She'd removed the garland from her tree and considered tossing it in the trash. Instead, she'd coiled it carefully and put it in a Ziploc bag. The cookies hadn't worked on her. The animals sounded the same as they always did. And Gavin was leaving in the morning. She had half a mind to report him to the authorities as unstable. That hardly seemed fair given the cookies had worked for Francis. Francis had called it a day. Amelia was alone in the clinic. Outside the door there arose a huge clatter. Boots rang on wood. Bells jingled. A dog barked something that sounded like, "Ho ho ho." Amelia's heart thumped. She hurried to open the door. Her porch had been decorated on one side with a Christmas tree with twinkle lights. On the other side, 2 stockings hung from a fake fireplace, one for Scrooge, one for the Grinch. A large sandwich board sign was at the bottom of the steps. Someone had painted, "Santa's pets stay here while he skis." What do you think? Gavin and Snowflake stood in the parking lot. "It looks great from the street." Had he listened to nothing she'd said about her first few months here? The sun had set and the air was cold, but not as frozen as her heart. "I think I'm going to demand boxes and bows take it down." She opened the door behind her and put a foot back inside. Wait, please. Give him a chance." Amelia turned. "Is that, Snowflake? Speaking to her?" "She knows my name," Snowflake grumbled. "He talks. And not in a series of grumbles. Amelia put both feet on the porch and slammed the door behind her. Francis peered through the clinic window. Focus, Snowflake. Gavin tugged gently on the dog's ear. I can only handle one grovel session at a time. He smiled at Amelia. These decorations are if you need them next year. I wanted you to have decorations so I'd have an excuse to put them up for you. Have a nice life, Rhodey. Amelia hugged herself against the chill. She'd run outside without her jacket and was shivering like a chihuahua again. What else does Snowflake tell you to say? He's gone rogue. Snowflake panted. He hasn't listened to me all night. You should have heard him apologize to Lacey and Charlotte. I wouldn't have forgiven him. A car swung into the parking lot. Lacey's boyfriend Michael rolled down the driver's window. From the passenger seat, Lacey leaned over the center console into Michael's space and waved. Gavin's horrible at apologies, but you should forgive him anyway. See you at the snow castle. You're not helping, Gavin growled at them. Grinning, Michael rolled up the window and drove toward the ski resort. More cars were heading uphill in time for the light show at midnight. The door behind Amelia opened and Francis handed Amelia her coat. You should forgive him. Go back inside, Nurse Grinch. Amelia zipped up the jacket and thrust her hands in the pockets. He hasn't even said he's sorry. Give me a chance, Amelia. Gavin's eyes were as big and soulful as snowflakes. I'm sorry I met you before I worked through my grief. I let you down. I let Snowflake down. I let Charlotte and Lacey down. He drew a deep breath. But I've come to my senses. Really? Amelia didn't temper her sarcasm. Really? Snowflake didn't have any sarcasm. I'm not leaving town. I realized that the things I do here bring people joy. He spread his hands. Who knew? I did, she muttered. But I had to learn it for myself. His gaze captured hers. I had to realize that the smile on one boy's face from a light show is more important to me than the roar of a crowd. That easing the troubles of a mother is more important to me than a steady paycheck. I had to realize there's soul to remodeling and decorating, and anything else I decide to do, as long as I put my heart and soul into it. And then his voice softened in that way she loved, drawing her attention, tugging at her heart. I had to learn that there's joy, right here in Christmas Town. Amelia didn't dare breathe, afraid this was a dream and she'd wake up. But the thing that brings me the most joy? The thing that makes staying here the right choice. He began walking toward her. It's you. These past few days it's you that brings a smile to my face. It's you I think about when I go to sleep at night. Her heart beat like a drum riff from the Randall House Band. Not an angry riff. Not a riff with tense attitude. A happy, celebration of life riff. There's magic between us. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and gave her that crooked smile, the one that made her believe he was sincere about apologies and staying and magic. And I'm not referring to a talking dog. What you and I have, it might be what they sing about in the best love songs. And then he keyed something on his phone. The notes of an acoustic guitar filled the air, followed by a weak, but recognizable voice. Gavin's eyes locked on hers through the song Randall had left him. And when it was over, Gavin said, "Give me a chance to show you how strong I can be for you." She came down the steps to meet him. She'd give him a chance to lend her his strength. He took her hands, giving her strength just by being him, a dog-loving, Christmas-loving, loyal to his friends man. A Jeep turned into the parking lot. Charlotte rolled down the driver's window. Hurry up, you two. You don't want to miss the new year. You already missed kissing beneath the mistletoe in the town square gazebo on New Year's Eve. A local tradition that was rumored to guarantee wedding bells in the new year. Wesley rolled down the window behind Charlotte's. Dr. Scrooge. We get to stay up late and see the light show. Someone inside the Jeep said something to him that Amelia couldn't hear. Oh, yeah, and Penny doesn't have wet tail anymore. He gave her his endearing gap-toothed grin and waved as the window rolled back up. Charlotte made her way back into the stream of traffic heading to the ski resort. I was wondering, if you're not too busy tonight. Amelia could no longer contain her smile, because the magic of Christmas Town and Snowflake and Gavin were filling her chest with a joyful, tearful feeling. I hear the light show at the Blue Spruce Mountain Resort is quite good. You should go. Snowflake galloped up the front steps. Pick me up when it's over. He scratched at the door and Francis let him in. Amelia. Gavin's voice was huskier than Snowflake's. I'll gladly be your date tonight. And every night until we can test the tradition of Christmas Town's gazebo next December. Amelia drew him closer and moved her mouth over his. You know, there's an older tradition. The one about kissing your true love at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve.